Chapter 298. In the brightly lit dining hall, only the sound of breathing could be heard. This sudden bad news caught everyone off guard. Their original beautiful dream was destroyed like a bubble, and the cold and cruel reality made everyone's heart heavy. After a long while, Colin finally asked in a difficult tone, "How did Governor Leetum die?" "He died of old age." Governor Crete squeezed out these two words from between his teeth, and his face was full of horror and anger. Obviously, no one in the room believed this answer. How could Consul Leetum die at such a crucial moment? It seemed that Prince Leon had lost his patience and had taken the most extreme measures to get rid of the biggest obstacle in the way of the declaration of war. After Governor Leetum, who will be the next chairman? Scholar Dwayne asked in a deep voice. Emerson St. Prospero, Crete said with a dignified expression. Colin's heart sank to the bottom of the valley. His surname was St. Prospero, and this governor was obviously from the eastern region, and the eastern region was leaning towards. Colin had just met the second son of the Duke of the Eastern Region, the Earl of Avon, and his fiancée at the palace banquet yesterday, and this fiancée was Prince Leon's daughter. Therefore, it was obvious that the Eastern region had completely fallen to Prince Leon's side. Moreover, in terms of their own interests, the Eastern region was the most eager to see the Empire declare war on Yevil. After all, Yevil itself was located at the border between the Eastern region and the Radiant Moon Forest. Its existence had always been a thorn in the Eastern region's heart. Now that the Empire was willing to send troops to wipe out Yevil, the Eastern region would definitely support it with both hands and feet. After Governor Leetum's death, Governor Emerson took over as the chairman of the Senate. Of course, he would not delay any longer and would definitely push for a vote on the proposal to declare war on Yevil as soon as possible. Under such circumstances, Vera had no time to pressure the senators of the northern frontier to disregard Governor Seabass's orders and vote against the proposal. Moreover, Governor Leetum's death would also shock the senators of the San Lorenzo family, and more people would probably lean towards Prince Leon. Therefore, if the proposal to declare war was put to a vote in the Council of Elders, it would definitely receive an absolute majority of votes. Thinking of this, Colin could not help but feel despair in his heart. Bang! Crete slapped the table heavily. Unable to suppress the fury and fear in his heart anymore, he bellowed. He is breaking the rules of the game. Indeed, killing an Archon of the Council of Elders brazenly was a bit too much. As a consul, Crete couldn't help but feel a little sad. He stood up with a swoosh and said angrily, "I will never condone such a desecration of the highest authority of the Empire. No matter who did it, they must pay the price." Crete's face was gloomy, and he was shivering uncontrollably. There was no telling whether it was because of fury or fear. However, it was clear that he wasn't willing to give up just like that. Even if the murderer was Prince Lacey, the consul from the western region was unwilling to compromise. He looked at Vera and Colin with bright eyes and said, "I will immediately contact the senators I am familiar with and ask for a thorough investigation into the cause of Governor Leetum's death." After saying that, he strode out of the dining room without waiting for a response. Colin and Vera looked at each other for a while, and could only sigh a few times. With heavy hearts, they bid farewell to the butler and left. After boarding the carriage, Colin and the other two fell silent. Obviously, they were all thinking about how to resolve the current situation. The situation was already in their favor, and they were about to stop Prince Leon's proposal from passing through the Council of Elders. However, no one had expected that the paladin of the San Lorenzo family would choose to flip the table. This was really too unruly. Colin secretly cursed in his heart. He had been restraining himself and working hard within the framework of this political game. However, since someone had taken the initiative to destroy the game, he couldn't be blamed for not following the rules. At this moment, Vera suddenly asked, "Colin, do you think Crete will be able to find the real murderer who killed Governor Leetum?" Colin sighed and said, "I don't think there is much hope. Since Prince Leon dared to kill, he certainly wouldn't leave any traces behind. Therefore, even if everyone knows that he killed Governor Leetum, no one can do anything to him if there is no evidence." "That's right. No one can do anything to Prince Leon." Scholar Dwayne also agreed, but then he added solemnly, However, the changes in people's hearts do not require evidence. Prince Leon's move may seem to have succeeded in getting his proposal passed through the Council of Elders, but he will lose even more. Perhaps it won't show in a short time, but this wanton trampling on the rules will bring him a fatal backlash one day. Colin nodded in silence. Indeed, Prince Leon was now relying on his peerless strength to ignore the rules. However, the paladin was still a human, not a god. One day, he would grow old and his strength would decline. The more unscrupulous he was now, the more he would be punished when his strength was no longer enough to deter everyone. Of course, that day was still very far away, and Colin had to face the thorny problem at hand. Just as Colin was racking his brains to come up with a countermeasure, the carriage suddenly stopped. Scholar Dwayne lifted the curtain and was about to ask what had happened when he heard the accompanying guard report. "Miss Vera, there is a mage blocking our way in front." "A mage?" As soon as Vera heard the guard's report, she immediately got out of the carriage and saw an old man wearing a silver robe standing in the middle of the road, looking at her with a smile. "Master Ernest!" Vera exclaimed in surprise. She was about to walk over to greet the old man, but as soon as she took a few steps, she realized that her hand was being held back by Colin. "That is the president of the Yule Mage Council." Vera turned around and explained. "Don't worry, nothing will happen." "Well, be careful then," Colin said as he let go of her hand. However, he still took a few steps forward and maintained a distance between them, giving the other party enough privacy. Ernest talked to Vera for about a quarter of an hour before he nodded at Colin and disappeared into the night. "What did he say to you?" Colin asked as soon as they got into the carriage. "Master Ernest heard that Prince Leon wants to declare war on Yule, so he wants to meet Emperor Reinhardt to seek a peaceful solution." "Then why didn't he go through the normal diplomatic channels? Why did he come to you instead?" "He said that he has already submitted a letter of credence, but he did not receive any response at all. That is why he came to me, hoping that I can pass on the message to His Majesty." "What else did he say?" "He said that Yule does not want to be the enemy of the Empire, and that Mr. Ernest's actions in the northern frontier were all his own actions. He did not receive the consent of the Mage Council, and the Mage Council will not tolerate the use of a forbidden spell to sacrifice civilians." "That's all." "That's all." Colin shook his head slightly. He was a little disappointed with the president of the Mage Council. Even though he had submitted a letter of credence, Emperor Reinhardt was not willing to meet him. Did he really think that His Majesty would agree to meet him through Vera? Moreover, what he said was not important at all. If Colin was in Emperor Reinhardt's shoes, he would not have been moved by these words. What's more, the key person in the political situation in the imperial capital was not Emperor Reinhardt at all. Even the emperor was forced to pretend to be sick. Instead of looking for Emperor Reinhardt, it would be better for Soren to meet Prince Leon directly. Colin sighed secretly. It seemed that he could not rely on Yule anymore. Not long after, the carriage arrived at the Phoenix Palace. When they arrived at the side hall, Colin helped Vera out of the carriage before saying goodbye to Scholar Dwayne. As soon as Colin entered the room, he smelled a familiar fragrance. When he looked up, he saw Empress Medela leaning against the sofa and looking at them with a smile on her face. "Vera, Colin, I have been waiting for you for a long time." Chapter 299. Empress Medela sank into the soft sofa with a smile on her delicate red lips. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and rested her chin on the other hand. Her golden hair casually draped over her shoulders like the noon sun, and her slender snow-white calves swayed gently under her red dress. Her posture was languid, and her expression was charming. Unfortunately, Colin was not in the mood to appreciate the beauty in front of him. In fact, there was a strong sense of dissatisfaction rising in his heart. It was obvious that Emperor Reinhardt was the one who caused this trouble, but he was constantly running around trying to win the support of all the big shots. On the other hand, the couple was pretending to be sick, and the other was showing off her beauty. "Auntie, were you waiting for us?" "Yes." Empress Medela sat up straight and smiled. "Judging from your expressions, you must have heard about Consul Leadham's death, right?" Vera glanced at Colin and saw his gloomy face. She nodded and said, Yes, we were just having dinner at Crete's house when we heard the news. Auntie, why don't you look worried at all? What is there to be worried about? Empress Medela laughed. You are the one who is wasting your time on this matter. Hey, didn't I tell you from the beginning? Just wait in Phoenix Palace. When the time is right, Vera will naturally inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Auntie, Prince Lacey is going to start a war against Yevil. How can I just wait here like an idiot? Then, you have been working hard for the past few days. Have you come up with any good results? Faced with Empress Medela's rhetorical question, Vera was a little depressed. She lowered her head and did not speak. At this time, Colin took over the conversation and asked in a deep voice, Your Highness, did you already have a solution? Empress Medela smiled charmingly, but did not answer Colin's question. Instead, she said, Consul Leadham's death is unclear, and at such a critical and sensitive time, the Senate will not let this matter rest. Some people will definitely pay the price for this. Colin looked at Empress Medela's confident face and could not help but blurt out, Are you so sure that the Senate will be able to catch the real murderer? Of course. Empress Medela replied without hesitation. Colin frowned. He was just about to say that with Prince Lacey's strength, how could there be any evidence of him killing an old consul? But then he realized that this was all a trap. For Empress Medela to be so confident, there was only one possibility: she was framing him. Colin realized that he had been misled all this time. Indeed, Prince Letham's death benefited Prince Letham the most, so he naturally thought that it was Prince Letham who killed him. Moreover, Prince Lacey did have the ability to kill a consul without anyone noticing. Empress Medela's Consul Leadham's death, Prince Lacey's of Consul Leadham. It could also be a trap set up by the Empress, no, by Emperor Reinhardt's faction. Colin Medela did not know what they did to Consul Leadham's body to make Prince Lacey unable to clear his name. But looking at Empress Medela's expression, they must have enough confidence to make Prince Lacey unable to defend himself. As long as Prince Lacey carried the crime of killing a consul, he would become the public enemy of the nobles. Even if no one dared to use such a crime to execute a paladin, Prince Lacey would be completely isolated and would lose his appeal. He would probably become a wandering knight from then on. This way, the proposal to declare war on the mages would naturally die prematurely. Moreover, the Emperor had used this incident to remove the biggest obstacle to his control of the Empire. From now on, Imperial Dragon City would truly be under Emperor Reinhardt's absolute control. Looking at Colin's constantly changing expression, Empress Medela seemed to have seen through his thoughts. She quietly got up and walked in front of Colin and said lightly, Now you should understand why I reminded you not to mess around at the welcome banquet, right? At this time, the charming smile on Empress Medela's face had disappeared, and was replaced by an inviolable dignity, showing the authority that an empress of the empire should have. Of course, Colin Medela understood. It turned out that this proposal to declare war was a trap from the beginning to the end. It was just to fabricate a motive for Prince Lacey to kill. As for whether the proposal would be passed or not, Empress Medela did not care from the beginning. It was ridiculous that Colin and Vera had been kept in the dark and thought that they were smart enough to run around. What was even more ridiculous was that Colin Medela had almost succeeded. With the support of the elders of the Western region and Leadham's delay, Vera could have remotely pressured the elders of the northern frontier, through Marquis Garcia Medela, to disregard the request of Governor Seabass and vote against the proposal. Who would have thought that at the last moment, it would be his ally who would have completely strangled Colin Medela's plan in the bud? No, it was not an ally. Colin Medela had thought that he was an ally of the Emperor and Empress, but he did not expect that they would not even take him seriously. Just wait patiently. Don't mess around. Colin Medela and Vera Medela's efforts over the past few days were just a joke in the eyes of the Emperor and Empress. Even if they were about to achieve their goal was not the Emperor and Empress goal. Their efforts could also be erased by the Emperor and Empress at will. Empress Medela looked at Colin expressionlessly and said coldly, Perhaps we had some misunderstandings in Silvery Moon City before, and because of that, you lack the necessary trust in me. But I don't want this to happen again otherwise. Empress Medela did not continue, But her cold eyes had already expressed her meaning very clearly. When Vera Medella saw this, she quickly stepped forward and persuaded. Auntie, this time we also want to help. It's not that we don't trust you. Colin Medella suppressed the anger in his heart and bowed his head respectfully. Your Highness, I know that I was reckless this time, and I almost ruined your plan. I sincerely apologize to you. As for the misunderstanding in Silvery Moon City that you mentioned, I assure you that there is no such thing at all. I only have infinite respect and trust for you. That's the best. Empress Medella's charming smile finally appeared on her face again. Colin, you are a smart and capable person. With you assisting Vera in guarding the northern frontier, His Majesty and I can rest assured. So don't do anything stupid again. Otherwise, Vera is not the only one who can become the ruler of the northern frontier. This sentence was very serious. Colin Medella and Vera Medella could only bow their heads obediently and endure. At this moment, the authority of the Empress of the Empire was fully displayed. All right, you two should rest early. There is still a good show to watch tomorrow. After Empress Medella finished speaking, she lightly swayed her willowy waist and gracefully walked out. Vera Medella suddenly thought of something and suddenly called out from behind. Auntie, on the way back, we met the president of the Mage Council, Ernest. He said that he wants to meet His Majesty. However, Empress Medella did not even turn her head and coldly said, Haha, he is just an idiot who is immersed in arcane research and has become stupid. How dare he want to meet His Majesty? Before she finished speaking, her beautiful figure had already disappeared into the night. Colin, it seems that Auntie is really angry. Vera Medella whispered as she held Colin's hand a little nervously. Don't worry, we did not cause any trouble. Your auntie was just scolding us verbally. Colin Medella smiled and comforted her. Vera Medella nodded and said, Then we should ask for Auntie's opinion first before we do anything in the future. Don't question her decisions anymore. Okay. Colin Medella smiled and agreed, quietly hiding the dangerous light in his eyes. How could he tolerate Empress Medella's contempt? In particular, when Medella said that Vera is not the only one who can become the ruler of the northern frontier. Colin Medella realized that all Empress Medella wanted was an obedient northern frontier. As for who the ruler of the northern frontier was, she probably did not care. If Vera could do it, then so could Joyce. This made Colin Medella feel a deep sense of crisis. Chapter 300. Passing through the long corridor, Empress Medella returned to her chambers. Faint sounds of prayer came from the palace, rippling with soothing power. Your Highness. The maids in front of the palace bowed in greeting. Is His Holiness Gregory performing a healing spell on His Majesty? Yes. Empress Medella nodded and stood quietly outside the palace, waiting for the prayers to stop. Only then did she walk back in. The white gold holy light had not completely dissipated, covering the palace with a layer of holy light. Your Majesty, are you feeling better? Empress Medella walked quickly to the bed. At this time Emperor Reinhardt was leaning against the bed, his face pale and his expression dispirited. This was not the state a powerful 6th grade knight should be in. Thanks to His Holiness Gregory, I can feel my body slowly recovering. His voice was weak, as if a gust of wind could blow him away. Your Majesty, you are too polite. This is mainly because of the Lord's radiance. Pope Gregory said with a smile. The Pope of the Church of Glory was standing in front of the Emperor's bed, holding a white scepter in his hand, and wearing a crown of thorns on his head. His eyes were small, and because of his always smiling expression, no one could see the changes in his eyes. Praise the Lord! May His radiance last forever. Empress Medella praised. Then she asked, His Holiness Gregory, have you found the cause of His Majesty's illness? The Pope frowned and sighed. His Majesty should have been poisoned, but I have never seen this kind of poison before. That's why the treatment process is so slow. A trace of disappointment flashed across Empress Medella's face, but then she thanked the Pope repeatedly and sent him out of the palace. When only the husband and wife were left in the palace, Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed. Do you think this old man will deliberately slip up and let me die when he's treating me? Empress Medella pursed her lips. Gregory won't let you die in his hands. Besides, he's more concerned about whether or not you're really poisoned. Of course I'm really poisoned. Cough cough. Emperor Reinhardt coughed a few times and looked at the queen with a scrutinizing look, asking, I'm really curious, where did you find this poison that even Gregory couldn't recognize? Will you attend tomorrow's funeral? Empress Medela asked. Will you attend tomorrow's funeral? Of course, Emperor Reinhardt declared without any hesitation, with ruthlessness beaming out of his eyes. I'm going to watch my good uncle's reputation be ruined, and his friends betray him. Then you should rest early and recover your energy, Empress Medela said casually before getting up to leave. Wait. Emperor Reinhardt called out to her. Queen Medela turned around and looked at her husband impatiently. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was clear. What else do you want? In the face of his wife's somewhat rude gaze, Emperor Reinhardt didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled and asked, I heard that the two brats from the northern frontier have really done something. If it weren't for us, they might have been able to stop the proposal from going through the Senate. Empress Medela smiled disdainfully and said, They're just two whimsical brats who think they're smart. They don't know how deep the waters of the Senate are, so they have such childish ideas. Don't worry, I've already taught them a lesson. Nothing like this will happen again in the future. Emperor Reinhardt nodded and then asked, So you still insist on Vera inheriting the position of the Dukes of the North? Yes. But as you can see, Vera is not an easy character to control. Why not choose Joyce? Empress Medela snorted and said, Joyce is indeed easy to control, but when the time comes, we might not be the ones controlling him. Don't forget the lesson of the eastern frontier. Do you want the northern frontier to fall into the hands of the church? Joyce is only 10 years old. He still has 8 years to go before he reaches adulthood. Let's not talk about whether he will continue to have feelings for Archbishop Ajani after such a long time. Even if he really marries her, I am confident that I can deal with this woman. But Vera, your brother has chosen a good husband for her. Are you worried about Colin Angeli? Empress Medela narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. Yes. Emperor Reinhardt nodded and said solemnly, This knight of the northern frontier, I can't see through him. Many times he has faced extremely bad situations, but he has been able to resolve them without any real danger. And some of the methods that he uses, even I don't understand. Empress Medela was silent for a moment and then said, I understand your concerns, but Colin can be won over. Are you sure? Yes. Based on the story that he told our son in Silvermoon City? Empress Medela nodded confidently. However, Emperor Reinhardt was not affected by his wife's confidence. The corner of his mouth twitched and he shook his head. Do you want to hear my opinion? Empress Medela did not say anything. It seemed like she did not want to listen, but she did not move either. Emperor Reinhardt smiled and continued, I think that we can push Joyce to the position of the Dukes of the North, and then let him be engaged to Judy. No. Empress Medela immediately interrupted when she heard her daughter's name. Why not? Emperor Reinhardt's face instantly turned gloomy. Empress Medela said word by word, I will not let my daughter become a sacrifice for politics. Marrying Joyce is a sacrifice? No, it has nothing to do with Joyce. Empress Medela's eyes flashed. All marriages that cannot be decided by oneself are tragedies. Of course, it is also a sacrifice. Emperor Reinhardt was so angry that he laughed and asked, So, our marriage is also a tragedy? Empress Medela stared coldly into her husband's eyes. After a long while she spoke softly. Isn't it? Emperor Reinhardt's breathing suddenly became rapid. An unnatural dark red appeared on his face. He stared at his wife with eyes full of anger, unwillingness, and naked possessiveness. Empress Medela stood there expressionlessly, as if ignoring her husband's gaffe. She waited until her husband calmed down a little before she spoke again. Your Majesty, don't forget our common goal. That is what is truly precious. It is a goal that is worth our lives to pursue and achieve. Don't be immersed in the boring love between a man and a woman. Don't be entangled in whether I love you or not. You are right, my Empress. Emperor Reinhardt seemed to have finally calmed down, and he said in a calm tone, Since you think you can control Colin, You'd better prove it to me. I don't want to hear just a few words. Okay. Empress Medela nodded slightly and turned to leave. Emperor Reinhardt stared at the departing figure with a complicated expression. Chapter 301. The Cathedral of Holy Light located on the Holy Mountain was magnificent and sacred, but it was unusually deserted. This was the closest place to the God of Light in the secular world, but at the same time, it was also the farthest place from the mortals. Only the real high-level members of the Empire of Light were qualified to come here and pray to the God of Light. In front of the God of Light, all beings are equal. This sentence seemed to be just an empty propaganda slogan. Of course, some people might be more equal than others. Today, the Cathedral of Holy Light was more lively than usual. Many nobles came to mourn for Governor Letham, and the attendants in front of the church were overwhelmed. Even the 3 cardinals stood in front of the steps to welcome the distinguished guests. Cardinal Tournan looked at the nobles who were walking up the steps one after another. Suddenly he stepped forward and greeted, "Miss Vera, Viscount Angley, welcome to the Cathedral of Holy Light. May the glory of the God of Light shine on you forever." Vera and Colin quickly returned the greeting, but they felt a little strange. Why was the cardinal so enthusiastic? With their current status, it was not necessary for the cardinal to welcome them personally. After all, Vera had not officially inherited the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin and Vera had never dealt with this person before. While they were puzzled, they heard Tournan say, "Miss Vera, I heard that you are going to be baptized?" "Yes, Cardinal." Vera nodded, and she seemed to understand the cardinal's plan. Sure enough, Tournan took the initiative to recommend himself. "I wonder if I can have the honor to baptize you?" Vera looked at Colin and saw him nodding gently. She smiled and said, "Of course. It is my honor to have you preside over the baptism ceremony." The cardinal's position in the Church of Light was second only to the Pope. Of course, it would be appropriate for Tournan to baptize Vera. However, at this moment, a grand voice suddenly sounded behind the 3 of them. "Tournan, I will personally preside over Miss Vera's baptism ceremony." The 3 of them turned around and saw that Pope Gregory had appeared there at some point. Tournan's expression changed and he hurriedly said, "Of course, it's definitely more suitable for you to perform the baptism." Colin narrowed his eyes and looked at the scene in front of him. All sorts of doubts arose in his heart. He did not understand what was so special about Vera's baptism. Or was it that the conversion of a former mage to the church really had such great publicity value that even the Pope could not help but fight for this credit? Of course, Vera would not refuse the Pope's kindness, and she immediately agreed to his request. After the few of them discussed the time of the baptism ceremony, Colin led Vera into the church. After entering the prayer hall, Colin felt that his eyes and ears were suddenly quiet, as if the noisy world had been completely isolated. This was another kingdom that belonged to the gods. There were no candles or magic lamps in the hall. The holy light that fell from the sky dispelled all the darkness, and the people who were bathed in it could feel a vast and sacred aura. They could not help but quietly hide all the dirty and dark thoughts in their hearts, for fear that they would blaspheme the gods. At this time, many nobles had gathered in the hall to pay their condolences. Colin glanced around, but found that he did not know many of them at all. It would be great if Scholar Dwayne was also here. Colin could not help but think. Unfortunately, Scholar Dwayne was neither a noble nor a court minister, so he was not qualified to enter the Church of Holy Light. Fortunately, Vera still knew many people, and she was introducing Colin to the big shots in the capital in a low voice. The warm and fragrant breath hit Colin's ear, and it was a little itchy but also a little warm. The old man standing in the coffin is Pope Gregory, and behind him on the right are the 4 senators. We have already met 2 of them. The one with a long beard is the senator from the south, Della St. Landis. The last one is thin and tall, and he is the senator from the east, St. Prospero. Colin smiled as he looked at the 4 senators, and he found that their faces were very gloomy. Perhaps the death of Senator Letham made them feel sad. For a long time, the Senate had occupied the top of the Radiance Empire's political landscape with an aloof attitude. Even if the senators were corrupt by nature, no one could control them. But now, It seemed that someone had reached out to the Senate, and the first thing they did was to use the most cruel and bloody means. The senators, who used to be pampered in the past, were frightened overnight, and they inevitably began to feel insecure. The one who is dozing off is the Prime Minister of the Empire, Baron Heidegger. The one on his left is the Finance Minister of the Empire, Marquis Grandy, and to the left is, seeing that Vera suddenly stopped, Colin curiously turned his head, and was about to ask what had happened, but he saw that she was looking at the door of the prayer hall. Colin also looked back and saw a handsome and elegant middle-aged knight at the door. He was wearing a gorgeous prince's suit, and there was a simple and dark knight's sword at his waist. He was walking in with his head held high, and his eyes were looking straight ahead. Wherever he went, it was as if he was the center of the world. Obviously, he was walking into the hall, but it was more like the entire towering Holy Light Cathedral was taking the initiative to approach him and welcoming him to the center of the prayer hall. It was not until he stood in front of the coffin that everyone broke free from this strange phenomenon and breathed a sigh of relief. "He is Prince Lacey." Vera's voice sounded again. In fact, Colin also knew that such a person could only be the Holy Knight who stood at the peak of the Empire's military strength. Although this was not the first time that Colin had faced a Holy Knight. The last time he met the Duke of St. Hilda in Icestone City, the other party was already seriously injured, and he did not give off such a strong sense of oppression. But now, facing a Holy Knight in his prime, Colin realized how small he was. Even if he was now a 5th-grade knight, after transforming, he would still dare to challenge a 6th-grade knight. But in front of Prince Lacey, Colin felt that if the other party wanted to kill him, he would not be able to withstand a single blow. This was the difference in the nature of life, just like the difference between a god and a mortal. His Majesty is here. Vera's voice sounded again. Colin turned around and saw a middle-aged man being pushed in a wheelchair. He was wearing a gorgeous robe, but his face was very pale, and his lips were completely pale. He did look like he had just recovered from a serious illness. Colin was a little confused. Could it be that Emperor Reinhardt was not pretending to be sick, but was really sick? Or was he really so dedicated that even if he was pretending to be sick, he would pretend to be sick? The one pushing Emperor Reinhardt was none other than Empress Medela. Behind her were two little fellows, Prince Harrison and Princess Judy. At this point, the truly important people of the Empire of Light were all present. Colin could not help but let his imagination run wild. If the Congress of Mages were to be ruthless and cast a super forbidden spell on the Cathedral of Holy Light, and if they could wipe out everyone present, the Empire of Light might fall apart because of this. Dong dong dong. The melodious bell sounded, and everyone in the prayer hall put on their most solemn and sorrowful expressions. Pope Gregory's old but loud voice began to echo in the hall. "Merciful God of Light, today we are gathered here to offer prayers for Consul Leadum San Lorenzo. He has finished his journey in the world, and has finally returned to the embrace of the Lord. He came from the dust, and he will return to the dust. May you, with your supreme power, grant him peace." Wait. Beyond reason, but within expectations, the Pope's prayer was rudely interrupted by a rude voice. Colin looked in the direction of the voice, and saw a middle-aged man with a solemn face slowly walking out of the crowd to the center of the prayer hall, facing Pope Gregory. "He is Consul Leadum's son, Fred San Lorenzo." Vera's voice sounded again in Colin's ears. Colin looked at the scene in front of him with great interest, looking forward to the next performance. He knew that the show was about to begin. Chapter 302. In the quiet and solemn prayer hall, only the suppressed breathing of the crowd could be heard. His Highness Gregory looked at Fred with an expressionless face. After a while he asked, "Mr. Fred, do you have any requests?" Facing the Pope's condescending gaze, Fred's Adam's apple moved quickly. He seemed to be a little nervous, but soon he adjusted his state of mind and said loudly, "Your Holiness Gregory, I don't mean to offend your authority, but my father's death is not clear. I can't accept that he was buried so carelessly. Mr. Fred, I can understand your pain and concerns, but I've personally examined Consul Leadum's body before. I didn't find any injuries, nor did I find any signs of poisoning. So your father died of old age." Your Holiness, my father's body has always been healthy. He was talking and laughing with us during dinner last night. How could he suddenly die for no reason? There must be something wrong. Gregory's face darkened. He asked sternly, "Are you questioning my judgment?" Fred's heart skipped a beat under the Pope's fierce gaze. He quickly stuttered and explained, I didn't mean that. I just want to examine my father's body again to confirm the cause of his death." "So you still think there's something wrong with my examination result?" Gregory's tone became colder. Sweat broke out on Philide's forehead. He could barely withstand the Pope's almost tangible pressure. He opened his mouth, but was unable to utter a complete sentence. "Your Holiness." At this time, someone suddenly spoke up to help Fred. "I think Mr. Fred's request is reasonable. We should examine Consul Leadham's body carefully again." Pope Gregory looked at Emperor Reinhardt and said calmly, "Your Holiness, I don't think it's necessary. If there's something wrong with Leadham's death, why can't I find it out?" "That's not necessarily true." Emperor Reinhardt smiled and said, "You haven't figured out what the poison in my body is, have you?" Gregory narrowed his eyes and stared at Emperor Reinhardt. Emperor Reinhardt also stared back without flinching. The atmosphere in the prayer hall became tense again. Colin coldly looked at the two people confronting each other in the hall, understanding that this was a direct confrontation between the imperial power and the divine power. But the question was, why was Pope Gregory so insistent on a new autopsy? Was it because he felt that his prestige had been damaged? Or was he worried that something would really go wrong? At the same time, Colin glanced in the direction of Prince Lacy from time to time, only to find that the Holy Knight had remained silent from the beginning to the end, as if everything that had happened had nothing to do with him. He didn't seem to be worried that this was a conspiracy against him. Just as the Pope and the Emperor were in a deadlock, Queen Medela smiled and said, "Your Holiness, I believe everyone here is very concerned about the cause of Consul Leadham's death. It's not that we don't trust you, but some things need to be investigated deeply to get the right result. After all, you haven't dissected the body, so I'm afraid you'll miss some key things." Pope Gregory defended himself coldly. "I just don't want to desecrate Consul Leadham's body for no reason." Queen Medela refuted, "But we're more concerned about the cause of Consul Leadham's death and the dignity and authority of the Senate. If someone dares to kill a consul, we won't let them get away with it." Fred had recovered by now and hurriedly said, "Yes, Your Holiness. I also agree to dissect my father's body, and I believe that if my father's spirit is in heaven, he will definitely agree to this. When he was alive, he valued the responsibility and authority of the Council of Elders more than his own life." At this point, Pope Gregory could no longer forcefully deny it. Moreover, he also noticed that all the nobles present, especially the members of the Senate, nodded in agreement when Fred spoke. Obviously, the nobles present couldn't tolerate the empire's political order being destroyed so crudely. Pope Gregory had no choice but to nod and agree to dissect Consul Leadham's body. Soon, a coroner was summoned into the prayer hall. Faced with the scorching gazes of so many important people of the empire, he was a little nervous. But soon he calmed down and took out his tools. Under everyone's watchful eyes, he cut open Consul Leadham's chest. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk dark red congested blood gushed out, giving the coroner a fright. This also caused everyone present to reveal shocked expressions one after another. The deceased's chest cavity is bleeding, cause of death. Ruptured heart. The coroner said carefully, "Wait. Why did my father's heart rupture?" Fred asked hurriedly. Cold sweat broke out on the coroner's forehead, as if he didn't dare to answer this question. Pope Gregory suppressed the shock in his heart and took a few steps forward. But when he saw the exposed ruptured heart, he couldn't hide the look of disbelief on his face. Colin stretched his neck, but couldn't see the situation in the coffin. But he knew that the real show was about to begin. Just as everyone was wondering what the coroner had found, Queen Medela also took a few steps forward and looked at the body in the coffin. Then she revealed a look of shock. But it was hard to tell how much of this shock was real, and how much of it was fake. "Your Highness Prince Rhy, it's best if you come and see for yourself," Queen Medela suddenly said to Prince Rhy with a serious expression. Prince Rhy, who had been silent all this time, seemed to realize that this matter had something to do with him. Confusion appeared on his face, but he still came to the coffin. Then his expression changed as well. After a moment of silence, Prince Rhy frowned and said bitterly, "That's right. That's right, this is my sword scar." Wow. Everyone's jaws dropped as they stared blankly at Prince Lacey. Colin was also stunned. Why was this paladin so honest? Was he fearless? Or did he find it beneath him to lie? But at the same time, he also had some doubts. Wasn't there no wound on Consul Letham's body? Pope Gregory couldn't have made a mistake about that. So why was there a sword wound on his heart? What kind of sword technique could pierce through the heart without hurting the skin? Perhaps she knew that many of the people present had the same doubts. So Empress Medela half explained and half questioned. "Prince Rhy, I heard that you have a sword technique called Verdict that can bypass the limitations of space and pierce the enemy's vitals. Is that true?" "Yes." Prince Rhy's expression was still indifferent. "Then, do you think there's another way to pierce through the heart without hurting the skin?" "As far as I know, no." Prince Rhy said calmly. "You don't have to beat around the bush. I can tell you directly that Consul Letham's injury was caused by my verdict." The prayer hall was immediately filled with all sorts of whispers and discussions. Obviously, no one expected Prince Rhy to admit it so easily. But what surprised them even more was that Prince Rhy actually opened his mouth to deny it again. "But I didn't kill Letham." This time, the discussion grew louder. Queen Medela smiled brightly and continued to ask, "Your Highness, since you deny killing Consul Letham, how do you explain this sword scar?" "I can't explain it." Prince Rhy's answer was still as straightforward as ever. Colin was a little speechless at this moment. Did this prince think that he could do whatever he wanted just because he was the best in the world? Now he didn't even care about framing him? But he was an archon of the Council of Elders. He was one of the most important figures in the political circle of the empire. Especially since Letham was an elder of the San Lorenzo family, and Prince Rhy's uncle. Once this accusation was confirmed, no matter how powerful Prince Rhy was, he would not be able to avoid being betrayed by his family. At this time, the nobles in the prayer hall gradually changed their expressions, especially the members of the Senate. They could not tolerate such a rule breaker, even if he was a paladin. Prince Rhy seemed to realize the seriousness of the matter and said belatedly, "I said I didn't kill him." He was still as domineering and direct as ever. But this sentence alone was not enough to convince the crowd. Queen Medela seemed to want to exonerate Prince Rhy. She asked, "Your Highness, who else do you think could imitate this sword style and leave such a sword scar?" "No one." Prince Rhy said firmly, his face full of pride. Colin's mouth twitched. He was speechless. Should you be proud at this time? Perhaps it was because he had always been used to solving everything with force. He was used to everyone worshipping him as the incarnation of God when the name of the Holy Knight was revealed. Prince Rhy had probably forgotten how to deal with treacherous schemes and traps. Perhaps he really thought that as a paladin, everything he said should be taken for granted. But with such irrefutable evidence, even if Prince Rhy said that he did not kill anyone, would he be able to convince the crowd? Colin looked around and came up with a negative answer. Prince Rhy had a motive to kill. Now that there was irrefutable evidence, it was basically enough to convict him. Queen Medela said with a smile, "Your Highness, you're making things difficult for us. You say that you didn't kill anyone, but you also say that no one other than you can cause such a scar." "This," Pope Gregory said. "Your Highness, the world is big and full of strange things. How can you be sure that no one can imitate this sword style?" Prince Rhy looked at the Pope indifferently, but did not say anything. However, his eyes did not reveal gratitude. Instead, he felt that the Pope's words had tarnished his swordsmanship. Emperor Reinhardt, who was sitting in a wheelchair, finally spoke. He said coldly to Prince Rhy, "Uncle, if you can't prove your innocence, then I can only convict you." Prince Rhy stared into Emperor Reinhardt's eyes but did not say anything. Emperor Reinhardt's eyes were deep. He looked at his uncle without fear and at the same time he declared, "Rhy San Lorenzo, in the name of the Emperor of the Empire of Light, I hereby strip you of your title of prince and banish you from the country. Unless you can find the real culprit, please don't step into the Imperial Dragon City again." Prince Rhy was still expressionless in the face of the Emperor's judgment. He stared at Emperor Reinhardt for a long time, and did not say anything. The atmosphere in the prayer hall gradually became stagnant. Everyone felt an extremely terrifying pressure shrouding them, making them unable to breathe. Colin's heart was in his throat. He was afraid that the paladin would be impulsive and start a massacre. Time seemed to have stopped. It seemed like a moment, but it also seemed like a long time had passed. When everyone regained their senses, they realized that the prideful paladin had disappeared from the prayer hall, without them noticing. Colin frowned. Obviously, he did not expect Prince Rhy to leave without saying anything. By leaving, he had almost confirmed the accusation of Lidam's murder, unless he could find the real culprit. However, Colin did not have much hope. Moreover, he could not figure out what method the Emperor and the Empress used to kill Lidam. How could they kill him with Prince Rhy's famous move? Even Prince Rhy himself admitted that he was the only one who could use this move. How else could he explain himself? The proud paladin probably chose to leave because he was speechless. As a result, Prince Rhy was finally forced out of the political arena of the Empire by Emperor Reinhardt. From now on, the Empire of Light was really back under the control of the Emperor. At this time, Emperor Reinhardt's voice sounded again. "All right, everyone, let us continue to mourn for Governor Lidam." Chapter 303. After the funeral, everyone left the Cathedral of Holy Light one after another. It was very quiet throughout the entire journey. No one talked, as if they were immersed in the grief caused by the death of Governor Letham. However, Colin felt that everyone should be digesting the shocking news that Prince Letham was the murderer and the possible impact of his conviction. There was no doubt that the political scene of the Empire would undergo earth-shaking changes. Emperor Reinhardt would also be in charge of the Empire. Many of the nobles and high-ranking officials were already thinking about which side to take in the future. There were also a few people who felt that there were still many strange things about this murder case. However, there was irrefutable evidence. Prince Letham could not be exonerated just by saying that he did not kill Letham. Colin knew that the Empress had already determined that Prince Letham was the murderer before she dissected Letham's body. This was definitely not a speculation based on the motive of the murder. She knew the real cause of Letham's death. Therefore, Colin was sure that this was a premeditated framing. However, he could not figure out how the Empress did it. What was the matter with the sword wound on Letham's heart? After everyone left, Colin and Vera also walked out of the cathedral. As soon as Colin stepped out of the cathedral, he saw a gorgeous carriage parked at the entrance. He seemed to have some guesses in his heart when he saw the bright flame emblem on the side of the carriage. Sure enough, a knight of the San Lorenzo family walked over and bowed. "Miss Vera, Viscount Angley, His Majesty invites you in." "Okay." Colin held Vera's hand and boarded the carriage. The interior of the carriage was very spacious and luxuriously decorated. There was a layer of cashmere carpet and a soft couch in the middle. Emperor Reinhardt was leaning on it, and Empress Medela was sitting next to him. She was smiling as she looked at the two people who walked in. There were benches on both sides of the carriage. Prince Harrison and Princess Judy were sitting on the benches on the right. Vera and Colin quickly stepped forward to greet them. Emperor Reinhardt pointed to the bench on the left and said with a smile, "You two don't have to be shy. Take a seat." "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Vera, how long has it been since we last met?" "Your Majesty, it should be almost 15 years. Hehe, is that so?" Emperor Reinhardt recalled. "The last time I saw you, you were still a babbling little girl running around. I didn't expect you to grow so big in the blink of an eye. And she's already married. It's just that your wedding was so rushed that we didn't even have time to prepare a gift," Empress Medela said with a smile. "Aunt, you're too polite. At that time, the situation at the northern frontier was too complicated, so the wedding was rushed. It was our fault. I don't mean to blame you. However, it's not too late to make up for the gift now," Empress Medela said with a smile. then gently knocked twice on the side wall. The door opened again, and a middle-aged knight with a serious expression walked in. He knelt on one knee and saluted the emperor and empress. Empress Medela pointed at the knight and said to Vera, "This is my gift to you." Before Vera could understand what she meant, Empress Medela said to the knight, "Knight Fermi, I order you to pledge your loyalty to Miss Vera." "Yes." Knight Fermi responded without hesitation. He then turned to Vera and knelt on one knee. He pulled out his sword from his waist and raised it above his head. "I, Fermi Stone, pledge my unparalleled loyalty to the great golden lion, Vera St. Hilda. As long as I live, your will be my goal, and where your sword points will be where I will go. I swear in the name of the ancestors of the Stone family that I will always be loyal to you." Vera hesitated for a moment, but she still took the sword and tapped it on Knight Fermi's shoulder. "I accept your loyalty," Empress Medela explained. "Knight Fermi was the dowry that the House of St. Hilda prepared for me when I married into the royal family. Now that I am returning him to the House of St. Hilda, it can be considered as a form of inheritance. In addition, I am also thinking about Knight Fermi. He was originally a knight of the northern frontier, and now that he has returned to his hometown, he will definitely be able to make a name for himself. It is better than following me around as a captain of the guards. Aunt, please rest assured that I will make sure that Knight Fermi is properly settled. I will not let his talent go to waste. Actually, I have a suggestion on how to settle Knight Fermi. Aunt, please tell me." Before accompanying me to Imperial Dragon City, Knight Fermi was already the deputy commander of the Golden Lion Legion. After so many years, he has always wanted to return to the army. Therefore, I hope that you can give him such a chance. Okay, I will arrange for Knight Fermi to be transferred to the Golden Lion Legion as the deputy commander. I heard that the former commander of the Golden Lion Legion, Knight Nelson, has died in battle. Emperor Reinhardt suddenly asked. Yes. Vera hesitated for a moment, but she did not reveal the true cause of Knight Nelson's death. When Colin heard this, he suddenly raised his head. He had a bad premonition in his heart. Sure enough, Emperor Reinhardt's next sentence made him clench his fists tightly. Since Knight Nelson has unfortunately died in battle, then let Knight Fermi take over the Golden Lion Legion. I believe that he has the ability to lead this army well. Vera frowned and hesitated before saying, But Your Majesty, I have already appointed Knight Campbell as the commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Emperor Reinhardt smiled and said, Is that so? But I remember that only the Dukes of the North are qualified to appoint the commander of the Golden Lion Legion, right? Vera was at a loss for words. She had no choice but to look at Colin with a pleading look in her eyes. Colin sighed in his heart. He understood that this was the Emperor's condition. If Vera wanted to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, then she would have to appoint Knight Fermi as the commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Needless to say, Knight Fermi was definitely a chess piece that the royal family had placed in the northern frontier. If he became the commander of the Golden Lion Legion, then it would be hard to say who the army would listen to in the future. This gift from the Empress is really a gift with a heavy heart. However, Colin was also very clear that he could not refuse this condition. Last night, Empress Medela had just said that Vera was not the only one who could become the ruler of the northern frontier. This was especially true now that Prince Lacy had just been driven away, and Emperor Reinhardt had taken over all the power. Under such circumstances, if Vera wanted to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, she would have to obey the Emperor's will. Therefore, he had no choice but to nod his head slightly and give Vera an affirmative look, indicating that she should agree to it first. Vera nodded and said, Yes, Your Majesty. You are right. I am indeed not qualified to appoint the commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Therefore, Knight Cambanine is only the temporary commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Since Knight Fermi is about to return to the northern frontier, I also think that it would be more appropriate for him to be the commander of the Golden Lion Legion. Emperor Reinhardt revealed a satisfied smile and returned the favor by saying, I heard that your father left a will before he died and appointed you as his first successor? Yes. Well, since that is the case, you can send the will to the Senate. When they have no objections, I will confer the title on you. Thank you, Your Majesty. Colin heaved a sigh of relief. After so long, Vera was finally going to become the Dukes of the North. At this time, Emperor Reinhardt's eyes turned to Colin. Are you Viscount Angley? Chapter 304. Yes, Your Majesty. Emperor Reinhardt's scrutinizing gaze made Colin feel a little uncomfortable. Fortunately, the Emperor quickly smiled and said, You are indeed a young talent. You are the best among the knights on the northern frontier. Your Majesty, you flatter me, Colin said modestly. At the same time, he was constantly guessing the Emperor's intentions. With the gift from Knight Fermi, Colin was now extremely vigilant against the Emperor. He was afraid that the Emperor would ask for more harsh conditions. You killed the Troll Emperor, annihilated the Troll army of 100,000, and quelled the rebellion on the northern frontier. Viscount Angley, you are worthy of such praise. Emperor Reinhardt said seriously. With your achievements, you are more than qualified to be a count. However, because you are a vassal of the House of St. Hilda, I will not overstep my authority in awarding you a title. However, I still want to reward you in other aspects. Colin wanted to say that he did not need the Emperor's reward, but he knew that he did not have the right to refuse. Just as he was feeling nervous, he heard Emperor Reinhardt say, I would like you to be Harrison's teacher. Huh? Colin was slightly surprised. Obviously, he did not expect Emperor Reinhardt to ask him to be Harrison's teacher. However, he soon realized the sinister nature of this request. If he became the prince's teacher, wouldn't that mean that Colin would have to stay in Imperial Dragon City? In this way, his influence on Vera would be cut off. Perhaps in 3 to 5 years, the northern frontier would be completely controlled by the San Lorenzo family. Saint Hilda would only be the ruler of the northern frontier in name. Forcefully suppressing the raging anger in his heart, Colin said with a troubled expression, Your Majesty, I'm really flattered by your recognition, but I'm worried that I don't have enough ability to teach His Highness well and disappoint you. What's more, I still have to manage the Viscount's territory in the northern frontier. I can't stay in Imperial Dragon City for long. Emperor Reinhardt waved his hand and said with a smile, I think you are capable enough to teach Harrison well. You don't have to be modest. As for the location, you don't have to worry about it. Harrison will go back to the northern frontier with you. Huh? Colin was shocked and immediately realized that he might have misunderstood Emperor Reinhardt. If he was willing to let Prince Harrison go to the northern frontier instead of forcing him to stay in Imperial Dragon City, this proposal would be an excellent reward and great honor for Colin. Harrison was Emperor Reinhardt's only son. If he inherited the throne one day, wouldn't he become the Emperor's teacher? Colin felt as if he was on a roller coaster. He suddenly realized that the Emperor was probably trying to win over the northern frontier. Knight Fermi was probably not a chess piece placed by the royal family in the northern frontier as Colin had thought. He wanted to compete with the House of St. Hilda for the control of the Golden Lion Legion. Instead, he wanted the commander of the most important military force in the northern frontier to have a good impression of the royal family. The Emperor was very clear about Colin's influence on Vera and the military power that Colin controlled. It could be said that although Vera would be the Dukes of the North in name, the one who really controlled the northern frontier was Colin. Now that he wanted Prince Harrison to be Colin's disciple, it was even more obvious that he was trying to win over Colin. So why was the Emperor in such a hurry to win over the northern frontier? Colin recalled the scene in the Church of Holy Light and suddenly had some guesses. Seeing that Colin was not speaking, Emperor Reinhardt frowned and asked, What's wrong? Are you still not willing? Colin hurriedly said, No, Your Majesty. If you insist that I am qualified enough to teach His Highness, then I will do my best to live up to your expectations. A satisfied smile appeared on Emperor Reinhardt's face. He turned to Prince Harrison and said, Harrison, come and greet your teacher. Prince Harrison was a little hesitant. From his eyes, it could be seen that he was still a little afraid of Colin. Perhaps it was because Colin had left a deep impression on him in Silvermoon City. However, since it was his father's order, Harrison did not dare to refuse. He had no choice but to bite the bullet and come in front of Colin. He bowed and said, Teacher. Colin hurriedly got up and bowed back. At this time, a clear voice suddenly sounded. Father, I also want Viscount Angley to be my teacher. Colin was slightly startled. He saw Princess Judy twisting her little body and pouting her lips coquettishly. Empress Medella's expression turned serious and she scolded. Judy, don't mess around. I'm not messing around. Princess Judy said coquettishly. Why can Harrison have a teacher and I can't? Empress Medella could only gently comfort her. I will choose another teacher for you. No. I want Viscount Angley to be my teacher. I also want to go to the northern frontier. Colin felt a headache coming on. He could only look down at the ground awkwardly. Empress Medella's beautiful eyebrows rose. She was about to scold her, but Emperor Reinhardt stopped her. He only heard him chuckle and ask, Judy, what do you want to learn from Viscount Angley? Princess Judy rolled her big round eyes and said, Dance. Colin was speechless. He couldn't help but think of the day at the welcoming ball when Princess Judy kept stepping on his feet. Ha ha ha. Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed out loud, as if he had heard something very interesting. A moment later he said in a doting tone, Okay, then you can become Viscount Angley's student together with Harrison. Awesome. Princess Judy excitedly jumped up from the stool. Colin felt a headache coming. He really wanted to reject this coquettish princess student, but before he could say anything, Princess Judy had already come up to him. She lifted the hem of her skirt and curtsied, pretending to be obedient. Teacher. Colin had no choice but to return the greeting. At the same time, he secretly glanced in front of him from the corner of his eye. He saw the Emperor smiling, but Empress Medella frowning, as if she was very unhappy about this. Seeing this scene, the originally unwilling Colin immediately put on a gentle smile and said, I don't know how to teach dance. I only know how to fight and kill. If your highness is still willing to learn from me. I'm willing. Judy hurriedly nodded. Colin nodded and turned to Emperor Reinhardt. He bowed and said, Thank you for your trust, your majesty. Then I will accept these two students. Empress Medella looked at her daughter seriously and asked, Judy, are you also going to follow Viscount Angley to the northern frontier? Judy, who was winking at her brother, heard this and nodded. Yes. I haven't been to the northern frontier yet. I want to see the direwolf. Then you won't see me for a long time? The little girl seemed to be hesitant, but she quickly became determined. I will go to the northern frontier to learn from my teacher for a while, then come back to accompany mother. Emperor Reinhardt waved his hand. All right. Young eagles have to fly alone. Our daughter can't always stay in Imperial Dragon City. There's nothing wrong with going out and taking a look. Thank you, father. Princess Judy smiled sweetly. Colin looked at Empress Medella's deflated expression and secretly laughed. He couldn't help but wonder why the emperor wanted the princess to go to the northern frontier, and why the empress was unwilling. Of course, he didn't know much about the couple, so he couldn't guess anything for the time being. After that, they chatted for a while, talking about the house of St. Hilda and the San Lorenzo family. The atmosphere was quite harmonious. Not long after, the carriage went down the Holy Mountain and returned to the Phoenix Palace. After Colin and Vera left, Empress Medella said to Prince Harrison and Princess Judy, Didn't you two always say that you want to ride a horse? Go outside and find Knight Eric. Yes. The two children cheered excitedly and ran out of the carriage. When only the Empress and the Emperor were left in the carriage, Medella asked with a sullen face, Why did you agree to send Judy to the northern frontier? Emperor Reinhardt replied indifferently, Why not? Moreover, it was her own request. Empress Medella smiled coldly. Aren't you afraid that if something happens to the two of them at the northern frontier, then you will have no descendants? Emperor Reinhardt was not angered by the Empress' rude remarks. Instead, he laughed and reached out to lift Medella's smooth chin. So what? Anyway, we are still young. We can have a few more children. Slap. Empress Medella slapped the Emperor's hand away and sneered. I really regret not poisoning you. Emperor Reinhardt pursed his lips into a smile and said nonchalantly, It doesn't matter. We are together day and night. You will always find another opportunity. Chapter 305. Who told you to do this? Busso, who had always been gentle and refined, was now red with anger as he questioned loudly. As the butler of Prince Lehigh, Busso was considered a respectable person in Imperial Dragon City. Even the nobles in the imperial capital would greet him with a smile. But now, he was being treated coldly by a city guard officer who was not even a knight. Mr. Busso, I'm sorry to have put you in a difficult position. The young officer said faintly, but there was no trace of apology on his face. But this is His Majesty's order. As he spoke, he opened a scroll and placed it in front of Butler Busso. Busso looked at the order from the Emperor with an ashen face, and found that it was just as the rude officer had said. Prince Lehigh had been stripped of his title for murdering Consul Lethem, and all his immediate family members had been banished from Imperial Dragon City. Even the prince's manor was taken back by His Majesty's order, and all the servants in the manor were forcibly dismissed. Butler Busso felt dizzy and his legs gave way, and he was about to fall to the ground. Fortunately, someone supported him from behind at this moment. Busso trembled as he looked back. Seeing that it was Shalia, he could not help but cry out, "Miss Shalia, is there a misunderstanding? Why would Master kill Consul Lethem?" Shalia's eyes reddened as she shook her head and said, "I just came back from the Cathedral of Holy Light. Father, he can't clear himself of the suspicion of murder, but I firmly believe that Consul Lethem was not killed by Father." Unfortunately, such words could not move the emotionless young officer. He said coldly, "His Majesty has ordered that this manor must be emptied today." The Earl of Avon saw his fiancée's anxious look and felt his heart ache. He could not help but say, "Officer, it's best to leave some leeway. There are still many doubts about Consul Lethem's death, and the case may be overturned in the future. If you don't show any mercy now, in the future, emph." Unfortunately, the young officer did not care about this at all. He waved the order in his hand and said, "I'm just following orders." The Earl of Avon sighed and ignored him. He knew that this guy in front of him was a hothead, and was probably specially sent to do this kind of offending work. Shalia no longer paid any attention to the iron-faced officer. Instead, she helped Butler Busso in and asked, "Where's Father? He didn't come back?" Butler Busso shook his head. "I haven't seen Master yet." However, when they walked into the living room, they saw a familiar and proud back. "Father." "Master." "Your Highness." Prince Lacy slowly turned around and looked at the three of them quietly. There was still no expression on his face, as if the current situation could not arouse his anger or worry. "Busso, go arrange for the servants to leave." "Master." Busso choked with sobs. "Are you really going to give up just like that?" Shalia quickly asked, "Father, I know you didn't kill anyone. Can't you find the real culprit who framed you?" Prince Rhy ignored his daughter and ordered Busso, "Don't question my decision. Go immediately." "Yes, Master." Butler Busso had no choice but to walk out of the living room in a daze. Later, Prince Rhy turned to the Earl of Avon and asked in a deep voice, "Evan, I'm no longer the Prince of the Empire. It's not too late for you to break off the engagement." The Earl of Avon was stunned, and thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. He knew that he was about to face the most important choice in his life, whether to escape in time, or to provide timely assistance. This was related to the future development of the Earl of Avon. The Earl of Avon knew very well that although his father had planned for him to replace his brother as the Marquis of the Eastern Region, and inherit the position of the Duke of the Eastern Region in the future, this change of heir was not up to the Duke of the Eastern Region alone. His brother had been the Marquis of the Eastern Region for 30 years, and had gathered a vassal force that could not be underestimated. These people would not want to see their years of investment go down the drain. They would do their best to prevent the Earl of Avon from ascending the throne. Therefore, the Earl of Avon had to seek outside help. This engagement with Prince Rhy's daughter, Shalia, was a prelude to the Duke of the Eastern Region supporting his second son. He thought that this marriage would be the greatest help to the Earl of Avon, but he did not expect that the situation would suddenly change, and this marriage would become a burden. Perhaps it was the wisest choice to draw a line with Prince Rhy, but looking at the calm Prince Rhy in front of him, the Earl of Avon gritted his teeth and firmly said, Your Royal Highness, I'm not a person who fawns over others. My engagement with Shalia was not because I coveted your power, but because I was sincere. Moreover, I firmly believe that you are innocent and will be cleared of suspicion in the future. Prince Rhy looked deeply at the young Earl of the Eastern region, as if he was getting to know him all over again. Then, Prince Lacy turned his head to look at his daughter. His expression finally changed a little, and his tone carried a trace of guilt as he said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Shalia, but I can't protect you for the time being. So you should go to the Eastern region with Evan first. I'll find you after I figure out the truth. No. Father, where are you going? I want to go with you. Prince Rhy shook his head and said, I'm going to find out the truth. It will be dangerous, so I can't take you with me. The Earl of Avon's eyes lit up as if he had realized something. He quickly asked, Your Royal Highness, do you have some clues? Prince Lacy nodded. I just went to Consul Letham's mansion and investigated the scene of the assassination. I found something interesting. Shalia also became excited and asked, Father, what did you find? Can it help you clear your suspicion? Under the expectant gazes of the two, Prince Rhy slowly shook his head and said with a deep gaze, I only felt a vaguely familiar aura, but I can't remember where it is at the moment. Halfway through his words, Prince Rhy suddenly paused, and for the first time, his expression changed drastically. It was no longer the indifferent expression from before. Father? Why are you? Shalia was just about to ask when she was stopped by the Earl of Avon. The Earl of Avon guessed that Prince Rhy had finally thought of something important. He immediately held his breath, afraid that he would disturb Prince Rhy's train of thought. Prince Rhy indeed thought of something. That familiar aura was an arcane wave. It was the same arcane wave that he felt when he killed Mr. Chung. When Prince Rhy rushed to the murder scene, the arcane wave was very weak, and it was likely that someone had purposely cleaned it up. However, Prince Rhy was still keenly aware of its existence. But at that time, he didn't realize what it was. Now, with a flash of inspiration, Prince Rhy finally remembered that more than a month ago, when he slashed 3 times at Mr. Chung in the dwarf barracks outside Coldwinter City, there was a subspace that suddenly appeared behind Mr. Chung, as well as a strange green eyeball. Ha ha ha. Prince Rhy suddenly laughed out loud. He suspected that his 3 slashes didn't kill Mr. Chung. Mr. Chung didn't know what arcane spell Mr. Chung used to evade his attack. Mr. Chung even used some means to retain some of the power of his attack, and released it on Consul Leadham. That was the reason for this framing. Interesting. Very interesting. Prince Rhy seemed to be in a state of excitement. Mr. Chung, you're a genius. But I'll kill you with my own hands. A dazzling sacred light exploded from Prince Rhy's body and filled the entire area. Father. Shalia couldn't withstand the light and had to close her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she discovered that her father was nowhere to be seen. Shalia was at a loss as she stood rooted to the ground. Only then did she realize that her father had left. The Earl of Avon sighed and went forward to hold Shalia's hand. He comforted her and said, Shalia, His Royal Highness must have gone to find the culprit who framed him. You should follow me back to the Eastern Territory. No. Shalia shook off the Earl of Avon's hand and ran out. I'm going to find my father. The Earl of Avon hurriedly chased after her and shouted, Do you know where His Royal Highness went? The northern frontier. Shalia said without turning her head. I heard Mr. Cheng's name. That evil wizard died at the northern frontier. So my father must have gone to the northern frontier. The northern frontier? The Earl of Avon stopped in his tracks, and a conflicted expression appeared on his face. After a moment of hesitation, he quickened his pace and chased after her. Wait for me, Shalia. I'll accompany you to the northern frontier. Chapter 306. The sun had already set, and the crescent moon had just risen. The night in the northern district of Imperial Dragon City was dim and hazy. Colin walked alone on the empty street under the pale moonlight. Everything that happened during the day kept replaying in his mind, and all kinds of doubts lingered in his mind. Colin could not fall asleep at all. Since he could not fall asleep, Colin left the Phoenix Palace and strolled around Imperial Dragon City. Of course, it was not accurate to say that he was strolling around because he had a destination in mind. Asterisk knock, knock, knock asterisk Colin knocked on the door of a courtyard. There was a dove with an olive branch in its mouth on the door. This was the emblem of the White family. The door creaked open, and an old man who looked like a butler walked out. When he saw the Viscount's formal attire that Colin was wearing, he quickly bowed and asked, "Dear Viscounts, how can I help you?" "My name is Colin Angeli. May I ask if Scholar Dwayne is here?" "Yes, he is. Viscount Angley, please come in." Scholar Dwayne did not live in the Phoenix Palace with Vera and Colin. Instead, he lived in a mansion owned by the White family in Imperial Dragon City. Although it was not a big mansion, it was still a good place to stay. The main members of the White family, such as the Viscounts, were all living in their own territories. Scholar Dwayne was the only one who lived in the mansion. Therefore, Colin did not inform the White family about his visit in advance. Under the guidance of the butler, Colin walked up the stairs and went up to the second floor. At this time, the servant who went to report the news had already brought Scholar Dwayne over. "Sir Viscounts, why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming? I would have prepared a good reception for you." Colin waved his hand and said, "There is no need to pay attention to these formalities between us. I just hope that I did not disturb you." "Of course not." Scholar Dwayne led Colin into the study room and asked the servant to bring 2 cups of coffee and some dried fruits. Colin's gaze swept across the study. The layout of the room was relatively simple. There was a sheepskin scroll spread out on the writing table. Next to it was a quill, ink and a seal. It seemed that Scholar Dwayne was writing a letter when Colin arrived. What surprised Colin the most was the wall full of books. At a glance, there were close to 1,000 books. In this world without printing technology, the value of books was comparable to gold. The number of books in a family's collection was also a symbol of the family's heritage. Noticing Colin's surprised gaze, Scholar Dwayne explained with a smile, "These books were personally copied one by one from the Academy's library when I was studying in the White Tower Academy." "Amazing," Colin praised. In comparison, the Angeli family's study was too shabby. There weren't many books at all. If it weren't for the fact that they had taken over Icestone City and taken over the Su Duo family's library, the number of books in the Red Castle might not even be as many as the ones in Scholar Dwayne's study. After taking a sip of coffee, Colin changed the topic and asked, "You should know what happened in the Cathedral of Holy Light today, right?" "Of course. This matter has already spread throughout the city. Also, I know that even Prince Rich's mansion has been taken over by the City Defense Army. Everyone inside has been expelled." "Haha, so fast." Someone must have taken advantage of the situation and added insult to injury. Colin put down his coffee cup and stretched his body on the sofa. He asked, "What do you think of Consul Leadham's murder case? Do you also think that Prince Rich did it?" Scholar Dwayne smiled and said, "Prince Rich has a motive for murder. Now that the autopsy has found evidence that he can't defend himself, it doesn't matter whether he killed anyone or not." "Indeed." Colin's eyes flashed as he asked, "But if he was wronged, who do you think is the most likely person to frame him?" "If Prince Rich was framed." Scholar Dwayne hesitated for a moment. "Then Emperor Reinhardt is the most likely culprit." Colin smiled faintly and asked again, "Is it because he has the most to gain?" "Yes." Scholar Dwayne nodded but did not say anything else. Colin also realized that many smart people in the Imperial Dragon City might have seen through the scene in the Cathedral of Holy Light today. However, the trap set by the Emperor was so ingenious that no one could unravel it. Therefore, they could only watch as Prince Rich became the murderer. "Then do you think that Emperor Reinhardt regaining control of the Imperial Dragon City is a good thing, or a bad thing for us?" "It is a good thing," Scholar Dwayne answered without hesitation. "Why?" Scholar Dwayne's confidence puzzled Colin. Although Scholar Dwayne had previously judged that Emperor Reinhardt was indeed more inclined to let Vera inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, that was because Prince Rich was still alive and Emperor Reinhardt needed to win over the sorcerers in order to keep his uncle in check. However, now that Prince Rich's reputation had been ruined by the murder case, He was completely isolated from the political situation in the imperial capital. Under such circumstances, Vera's role in the imperial capital was much smaller. Therefore, in Colin's opinion, the fall of Prince Rich was a bad thing for Vera. This was also the doubt that arose in Colin's heart when Emperor Reinhardt promised to confer the title of Dukes of the North to Vera. Scholar Dwayne looked into Colin's eyes and said seriously, "Because His Majesty needs a strong northern frontier as an ally." Colin's expression changed slightly, and he fell into deep thought. Today in the carriage, the Emperor and the Empress did some things, especially when they asked Prince Harrison and Princess Judy to become Colin's disciples. It was clear that they wanted to win him over. At that time, Colin was very puzzled. Now that Scholar Dwayne had also seen through this, he quickly asked, "Why does His Majesty need a strong northern frontier as an ally?" Scholar Dwayne did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Viscounts, who do you think is His Majesty's biggest enemy after he successfully expelled Prince Rich?" Colin thought for a moment, and felt that the various foreign races outside the Empire were not a big enemy yet, unless the Orcs could really establish the Third Empire. If that was the case, then the Emperor's biggest enemy must be from within the Empire. Colin wanted to say the Senate, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt that the Senate would at most be able to impede the Emperor a little, and could not be considered a great enemy. Moreover, if it was to deal with the Senate, there was no need to spend so much effort to win over the northern frontier. Then Colin had a flash of inspiration and blurted out, "It's the church." Scholar Dwayne smiled and nodded. "That's right." Colin sat up straight and various thoughts flashed through his mind. Of course, he could understand the reason why Emperor Reinhardt was hostile to the church. The battle between the imperial power and the divine power had begun almost since the Empire of Light was established. The San Lorenzo family and the entire empire's noble class were both dependent and wary of the church. They needed the church to build a bridge to communicate with the gods and become knights. At the same time, they were constantly on guard against the excessive expansion of the divine power. The church's reputation and prestige among the people were too high. If left alone, the emperor would easily become a decoration, and the lords would become the church's marionettes and shepherd dogs that managed the people for them. Of course, due to the special relationship between the two parties, the imperial family's ultimate goal was definitely not to eradicate the Church of Light. They just wanted to restrict the church's power within the church and not interfere in worldly affairs. For some reason, Colin suddenly recalled the time when he was in Silvery Moon City. In order to take revenge on Queen Medela for sowing discord between him and Queen Aisha, he had deliberately planted a seed of rebellion against the church in Prince Harrison's heart. Perhaps it was at that time that Queen Medela had decided that he was an ally that she could rope in. But then, Colin suddenly realized something. When he looked at Scholar Dwayne again, his gaze suddenly became incomparably sharp. He asked in a deep voice, "Did the imperial family send you to the northern frontier?" Scholar Dwayne's expression changed slightly. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded. "Yes." Colin's expression instantly turned gloomy. Chapter 307. The atmosphere in the study room of the White family was a little tense. Colin and Scholar Dwayne sat opposite each other in silence. The only sound that could be heard was the candles burning. After a long while, Scholar Dwayne broke the awkward silence. "Sir Viscounts, I have no ill intentions toward the northern frontier. Moreover, the Duke of St. Hilda knew very well that I was sent to the northern frontier by the royal family. However, he still trusted me." Colin believed that Scholar Dwayne was telling the truth. After all, Scholar Dwayne had never hidden his identity from the beginning. He was the second son of the White family, and the White family was the vassal of the San Lorenzo family. Therefore, when he went to the Duke of St. Hilda to pledge his loyalty, the Duke of St. Hilda must have already found out about Scholar Dwayne's background. Otherwise, he would not have valued him so much. "Then, why did you go to the northern frontier?" Colin asked the question that had been in his mind for a long time. It was reasonable to say that Scholar Dwayne should have served the San Lorenzo family, instead of going to the northern frontier and being suspected. You may not know this, but the House of St. Hilda and the San Lorenzo family have always been allies when it comes to fighting against the church. Oh. Colin's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly thought of the great change in the empire 300 years ago. Scholar Duane continued to explain. The Duke of St. Hilda died too suddenly, and he did not have time to inform his successor. Therefore, even Miss Vera does not know about this matter. However, if you ask Marquis Garcia, he will definitely give you a definite answer. What are the main forces in your alliance against the church? The most important ones are actually the two main forces, the Flame Territory and the Northern Frontier. Colin was shocked and he leaned forward slightly as he asked, "Are the other three territories under the church?" "No." Scholar Duane shook his head and said, "Only the Eastern region is a staunch church force. As you know, almost every duke of the Eastern region will marry a priest as his wife. They are the church's strongest supporters in the secular world. The Southern Territory had always maintained a neutral stance, neither leaning towards the church nor keeping a certain distance from the royal family. Furthermore, in recent years, the trend towards independence had become more and more obvious. What would happen in the future was hard to say. As for the Western region, because they were facing the most dangerous enemy of the empire, the orcs, they had always longed for military assistance. Therefore, their strategy was uncertain, and more often than not, they used this as an excuse to ask for support from the imperial family or the church. They were not reliable allies. Moreover, because of the current Duke of the Western region, they are more inclined towards the church. Why? Colin suddenly wondered. If I remember correctly, the current Duke of the Western region is a paladin. That's right. There are two living paladins in the Radiant Empire, Prince Lexi and Duke Sangarian. Scholar Duane's eyes flashed, and he suddenly asked a seemingly unrelated question. Lord Viscounts, have you ever wondered why Prince Lexi and His Majesty have always been at odds? Colin wanted to say that it was natural. No matter who the emperor was, he would be afraid of a prince who was above him in both prestige and force. But then he thought of the scene in the Cathedral of Holy Light today, when Queen Medela proposed to dissect the body of Senator Leadham. The one who objected most strongly was not Prince Lexi, but Pope Gregory. Could it be that Prince Lexi is close to the church? Yes. Scholar Duane nodded and said, so you should understand why His Majesty must expel Prince Lexi. With Prince Lexi in Imperial Dragon City, the San Lorenzo faction cannot form a united force, and this alliance against the church will only exist in name. Colin then wondered, as the guardian of the San Lorenzo family, why would Prince Lexi be close to the church? And what does this have to do with the Duke of the Western region being partial to the church? Scholar Duane took a deep breath and said, Lord Viscounts, in fact, all paladins will be partial to the church. Why? Colin felt a chill in his heart, and he realized that this was the key to the problem. Because once a paladin is injured, he must rely on the healing spell of a high-grade priest to recover. And this is the key to the church's control of the human race's highest combat power. Colin suddenly thought of the Bishop of Coldwinter City who suddenly died at the beginning of this year and asked. Then, when the Duke of St. Hilda was injured in the battle with the Troll Paladins. After the Duke was injured, he went to Bishop Zeon and Archbishop Riven, hoping to be treated. But Archbishop Riven took the opportunity to threaten the Duke, wanting to use this to turn the northern frontier to the church's side. However, the Duke was unwilling to be threatened by the church, so he forced Archbishop Riven to perform a healing spell on him. When Archbishop Riven refused, the Duke brazenly killed Bishop Zeon, and only then did Archbishop Riven yield. Colin was slightly surprised, and he secretly sighed that the Duke of St. Hilda was really ruthless. Then, Archbishop Riven was later removed from his position by the church. Was it because of this matter? Yes. After the church knew that the Duke had been promoted to a paladin, they had been thinking of ways to win over the northern frontier, but the Duke did not immediately yield. He did not want to become a puppet of the church. In fact, the Duke's injury was very serious, and Archbishop Riven's treatment was not enough. It was also because of this that although the Duke had not yet turned to the church, the Emperor no longer trusted his allies as much as before. He was worried that the Duke of St. Hilda would sooner or later turn to the church, because the Duke would not let his injury worsen day by day without doing anything. Colin nodded. Only now did he understand why the Emperor had allowed Mr. Feng to stir up trouble in the northern frontier, and even tacitly allowed him to use the trials to kill his brother-in-law. If the East, West, and North all turned to the Church, then how would the imperial family maintain their dignity? The Church would really become the de facto ruler of the Empire of Radiance. Colin's heart was heavy, and he said somewhat dejectedly, "If even the paladins turn to the Church, then I think that the imperial family has no chance of winning." Scholar Dwayne shook his head. "Lord Viscounts, you are wrong to think that way." "Oh, why?" "Paladins are proud existences. How could they be willing to be controlled and coerced by the Church? The Duke of St. Hilda suffered such a serious injury, and even though he was suspected by the Emperor and threatened by the Archbishop, he did not turn to the Church until his death. If not for the fact that Prince Lexi was born in a branch of the San Lorenzo family, and was not valued since young, and that most of his training resources were funded by the Church, he would not be willing to become the Church's hired thug. As for the Duke of St. Gerrian of the West, he had to face the threat of the orcs and was often injured. If not for the Church's healing skills, he would not have been able to hold on for so long. But I believe that if the imperial family and the Church fell out, Prince Lexi and the Duke of St. Gerrian would most likely not help the Church. Colin thought about it and felt that Dwayne's words made sense. No paladin was willing to be coerced by the Church. Even if they submitted to the Church on the surface, they would not obey sincerely. Seeing that Colin was deep in thought, Scholar Dwayne asked again, "Lord Viscounts, do you know when the founding emperor of the Empire of Radiance, His Majesty Ghana, passed away?" I only remember that he seemed to be quite young when he passed away." "That's right. His Majesty Ghana passed away at the age of 57. Colin immediately realized that there was a problem. How could a legendary paladin pass away so early? Could it be because of the Church? Yes. His Majesty Ghana fought for his whole life. Even if his strength was outstanding, it was inevitable that he would be injured. When the relationship between the imperial family and the Church was harmonious, this was of course not a problem. But later, when His Majesty Ghana began to deliberately limit the power of the Church, the Pope immediately ordered the priests to immediately stop healing His Majesty, and even the paladins who were unwilling to cooperate. This also caused His Majesty Ghana's injuries to worsen. But even so, His Majesty Ghana did not submit to the Church until his death. So, in fact, this is a secret war that has lasted since the founding of the empire. The imperial family hoped that the Church would only be a spiritual symbol, not keeping an army and not meddling in worldly affairs. But obviously, the Church was not satisfied with this. They wanted to become the uncrowned king of the empire, and wanted the emperor and the nobles to be puppets in their hands. So this war will continue, and the northern frontier is the key to the war between the two sides. And perhaps you did not realize that you, who defeated the eastern frontier's heavenly horse army, are also the target of the imperial family. Colin nodded. He finally understood why the emperor asked the prince and princess to worship him as their teacher in the carriage today. This was to make him a sharp sword in the hands of the imperial family, leading the northern frontier army to attack the eastern frontier that had completely turned to the Church. Colin fell into silence. In fact, he did not want to be involved in the power struggle between the imperial family and the Church. He did not have any ill feelings towards the Church, and he did not have much loyalty to the imperial family. Colin would not be easily fooled by wanting to make him a pawn for the imperial family, unless it was profitable. "I understand." Colin smiled and got up. "Thank you for answering many of my doubts. The situation of the Empire of Light is no longer shrouded in a fog for me." "It is my pleasure. Well, I have to go back and rest." "I understand. I still have to accompany Vera to the Senate." "Okay, Sir Viscounts, I will send you off." Scholar Dwayne sent Colin all the way to the gate. Just as he waved goodbye, he saw Colin suddenly turn around and ask with a smile, "Dwayne, are you loyal to the northern frontier or the imperial family?" Scholar Dwayne was taken aback. He glanced at Colin before replying with a solemn expression, "Yes. I am loyal to the Empire of Light." Colin looked at Scholar Dwayne with some surprise. And then he seemed to understand something, but he did not comment. He just smiled and turned around to leave. Chapter 308. The Senate of the Empire of Light was located on the south side of the central square in the northern district of the Imperial Dragon City. On the other side of the central square, there was a statue of the founding emperor of the Empire of Light, Garner San Lorenzo. The entire statue was more than 20 meters tall and was carved out of red sandstone. At first glance, it looked like a blazing flame. The statue of the legendary paladin was facing the Senate of Light from afar. It looked like a tacit comrade in arms who would accompany each other for eternity, but it also looked like a tit-for-tat enemy. At the beginning of the establishment of the Empire of Light, the founding emperor and the first pope had reached an agreement that the secular world would belong to the nobles, and the believers would belong to God. Therefore, although the church controlled the spiritual world of the entire human empire, it did not have any secular authority. However, the first pope was not willing to withdraw from the secular world just like that. He was not willing to let the San Lorenzo family dominate the world. Therefore, he joined forces with the other lords of the empire to put pressure on the royal family and asked them to limit the power of the emperor. This led to the birth of the Glorious Charter and the establishment of the Senate of Light. According to the Glorious Charter, a series of major administrative orders officially issued by the emperor, such as war orders, the appointment of dukes, the change of heirs, and so on, had to be voted and approved by the Senate before they could be implemented. Even if the emperor did not agree with some of the decrees, as long as they were approved by an absolute majority in the Senate, they could still be implemented. Previously, Prince Leon had tried to launch a war order against Yule, because he wanted to use this method to bypass Emperor Reinhardt, who would definitely veto the proposal. The Senate of Light represented the will and interests of all the lords of the empire, and it existed to limit the imperial power. Facing the rising sun, the door of the Senate of Light slowly opened, and a group of members of the Senate who had arrived walked in one after another. A gorgeous carriage stopped in front of the Senate of Light, but the people inside did not get out of the carriage. "Are you nervous?" Colin asked with a smile as he looked at Vera, who was lifting the curtain of the carriage and looking in the direction of the Senate of Light. Neither of them were senators, so of course, they could not enter the Senate of Light. However, at this time, they were discussing something closely related to Vera. It was no wonder that Colin asked her if she was nervous. "It's okay." Vera turned around and held Colin's hand. "Your palms are sweating, and you still say you're not nervous." Colin laughed and teased. "Didn't you say that it didn't matter whether you were the Dukes of the North or not?" Vera glared at her husband. Unfortunately, she did not feel any pressure from her husband at all. Instead, she just looked cute and adorable. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "I was too naive back then. I thought that it didn't matter who became the Dukes of the North. But now, I feel that the future of the northern frontier is in our hands." Colin was very pleased with the change in Vera's attitude, and he squeezed her soft and moist hands gently as he comforted her. "Don't worry, Emperor Reinhardt has the final say in Imperial Dragon City after Prince Lacey is banished. Since he has agreed to let you inherit the Dukes of the North, the Senate will not deliberately go against him at this time." Vera nodded silently, and she seemed a little nervous. Seeing this, Colin suggested, "Let's take a walk in the central square." "Okay." As soon as the two of them got out of the carriage, they saw the door of the Senate slowly closing. The quiet and solemn conference hall was full of senators who were attending the meeting. Banged the Senate's rotating chairman, Imogen St. Prospero, banged the gavel and announced loudly, "It's time. The meeting begins now." There are a total of 116 senators present at this meeting. All the resolutions of this meeting are valid now that the number of valid participants has been reached. Bang. The rotating chairman, Imogen, banged the gavel again and continued, "The first topic of this meeting is the declaration of war against Yevil. Next, let's invite the 5 senators, the 4 senators to express their opinions on this." Senator Letham was dead, but his successor had not been elected yet. Therefore, there were only 4 senators left out of the 5. "I object." Senator Crete Sangerian was the first to express his attitude. However, he did not continue to explain his reasons, as if it was no longer important. In fact, after Prince Lacy was banished, there was no need to discuss this topic anymore. Even if he was a paladin, it was inevitable that he would be defeated. I object. I object. I object. Sure enough, the next 3 archons all expressed their opposition to the idea. The rotating chairman Emasen banged the gavel and said, "Okay, the senators' speeches are over. Let's begin the voting. Those who agree with the proposal, please raise your right hand." There were 3 normal procedures for a Senate meeting. First, the rotating chairman would propose the proposal to be voted on. Then, the 5 senators would take turns to express their opinions. Finally, there would be a vote by a show of hands. It could be seen that in the entire process, only the 5 senators were qualified to speak. It was precisely because of this that although they were like the other senators, each of them had 1 vote, because there was an additional process of expressing their opinions, they could use this method to influence the subsequent voting. This was the real key to the senators' leadership position in the Senate. Now that all the senators were unanimously against the proposal to declare war, it was obvious that no one would dare to vote in favor of the proposal during the voting. Bang! The voting is over. There are 0 votes in favor and 116 votes against. I declare that the proposal is not passed. After the rotating chairman announced the result of the voting, he took a sip of water and said again, "The next topic is about Vera St. Hilda inheriting the Dukes of the North. May the 4 senators express their opinions on this matter?" I agree. The Western senator, Crete, was the first to speak. Before the Duke of St. Hilda died, he left a will that appointed Vera as the Marquis of the Eastern region. Therefore, it is reasonable for her to inherit the Dukes of the North. I also agree, the Southern senator, Dulles, said concisely. Then, it was the Northern frontier senators' turn to speak. However, the senators already had a rough idea in their hearts. Since 2 senators had already agreed, then the current senator from the House of St. Hilda would not object. Right? I object. Seabass made a statement that shocked everyone. Everyone stared at the senator from the northern frontier, waiting for his next explanation. Seabass slowly glanced around and said in a deep voice, "I do not agree with letting a mage become the lord of the northern frontier." After saying this, he closed his mouth and did not care about the complicated look in the eyes of the senators. Next, only the last senator, the rotating chairman, Emasen, was left to express his opinion. The senator from the eastern region first looked deeply at Seabass, then slowly swept his gaze across the entire audience. Finally, he said in a firm voice, "I object." There was an uproar in the audience. The senators immediately began to whisper to each other and discuss. Out of the 4 senators, 2 were in favor and 2 were against. This time, there was a good show to watch. Bang! The rotating chairman, Emasen, knocked the gavel and said in a clear voice, "Now let the voting begin." Chapter 309. After the founding emperor, Garner San Lorenzo, has there never been another legendary paladin in the Empire of Light? Colin looked up at the huge statue in the central square, and asked curiously. The 7th Order was the Sacred Realm, and the 8th Order was the Legendary Realm. Therefore, the 8th Order Paladins were also known as Legendary Paladins. No. Vera leaned her head on Colin's shoulder and whispered, "As far as I know, the House of St. Hilda once had a very talented paladin who was very close to the 8th Order. However, when he tried to break through to the Legendary Realm, he went crazy." Went crazy? Yes. He completely lost his mind and killed everyone he saw. Later, the Pope and 2 other paladins worked together to kill him. Colin's eyebrows furrowed tightly. Apparently, he had some doubts about this. Vera saw this and spoke again. The Pope at that time had an evaluation about this. The mind of a mortal cannot withstand the impact of the legendary realm. Only the blessings of God can keep one's mind. The blessings of God? Yes, many people guessed that the Pope meant that only the blessed could be promoted to the legendary realm. The founding emperor, Garner San Lorenzo, was also a blessed. Blessed? Colin rubbed his chin and suddenly remembered that when he was fooling the blood descendants, He also claimed to be a blessed. At this time he was also interested and asked, in the history of the Empire of Light, was there only one blessed person, Garner San Lorenzo? Vera thought for a while and said, well, at least, Garner San Lorenzo was the only blessed person recognized by the church. Haha, Colin laughed in his heart. There were quite a lot of imposters like him. How did the church deal with the people who claimed to be blessed? It seems that a few of them were tried. I am not sure about the details. You will need to check the church's documents. Colin shook his head. He didn't want to take the initiative to look up this kind of thing. Wouldn't that be revealing the 300 tales hidden here? Moreover, his 3 blood descendants were very reliable, and there was no risk of leakage for the time being. While thinking, Colin suddenly found that the door of the Senate slowly opened. Looks like it's over. Well, I hope that it will be a good outcome, Vera replied as she squeezed Colin's hand tightly. She was still a little nervous. Colin gently patted Vera's hand, indicating for her to be at ease. Then he walked towards the Senate. Good morning, Senator Seabass. Good morning, Miss Vera Viscount Angley. Excuse me, what was the result of the vote in the Council of Elders? Seabass smiled before he said, congratulations, Miss Vera. I believe that I will soon be addressing you as one of the Dukes of the North. Really? Vera was so happy that she almost jumped up in joy. Thank you for telling me this good news. Colin was finally relieved. Although this trip to Imperial Dragon City was full of twists and turns, he had finally achieved his goal. However, he also noticed that the expression on Senator Seabass's face was a little unnatural when he told Vera the good news. Colin felt that Senator Seabass might not have approved of Vera as one of the Dukes of the North, but he was forced to vote in favor of her. In fact, this guy might have even voted against her decision. Senator Seabass did not seem to want to talk much with Vera, and after a few words of blessing he hurriedly left. Colin and Vera were about to leave when someone suddenly called out to them. Miss Vera Viscount Angley. Colin turned around and saw Senator Crete standing not too far away with a smile on his face. Colin had a good impression of the senator from the Western region. When Colin and Vera were campaigning for the declaration of war, Senator Crete was one of the first forces that Colin and Vera had won over to the Western region. Greetings, Governor of Crete. Is there anything I can help you with? Senator Crete asked with a smile. I'm sure you already know the result of the vote in the Senate, right? Yes, thank you for your trust in me. I will do my best to protect the northern frontier for the Empire. Crete nodded and asked with a serious expression. Then do you know what the final result of the vote was? Vera shook her head. Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he asked with a smile. From what you're saying, is the result of the vote a little anxious? 62 votes were in favor and 54 votes were against, Senator Crete said directly. Colin narrowed his eyes immediately, realizing that something was wrong. Since the Emperor had already agreed to let Vera inherit the Dukes of the North, the senators from the Flaming Flame territory would definitely vote in favor of it. After all, Prince Leahy had already been expelled. As long as the senators from the Flaming Flame territory were not stupid, they would definitely not provoke Emperor Reinhard at this time. Since Senator Crete had taken the initiative to tell Vera the specific voting results, the senators from the Western region must have also voted in favor of it. Among the remaining 3 senators, Colin had not had much contact with the Southern region, so he was not sure about their attitude. However, the Southern region did not have any conflict of interest with the Northern frontier, so it was possible that some of them voted in favor of it. As for the Eastern region, they would definitely hate Colin to the core because of the destruction of the Pegasus Legion. They would also hate Vera. Therefore, the senators from the Eastern region should have voted against it. However, there were still less than 54 votes. Therefore, at least half of the senators from the Northern frontier had voted against it. When he thought about the unnatural expression on Senator Seabass' face just now, Colin sneered in his heart. So he asked, did most of the senators from the Northern frontier vote against it? Senator Crete nodded and said, yes, and when Senator Seabass expressed his opinion, he clearly opposed Miss Vera inheriting the Dukes of the North. Haha, Mr. Seabass is really unexpected, Colin said as he gritted his teeth. He could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. Previously, he had felt that Senator Seabass was hostile to Vera. Now, it seemed that Senator Seabass did not even bother to hide his hostility. But why? Was it because Colin had killed Drindon, the brother of Seabass' butler, Drindon? Or was it because Colin had beaten up Seabass' grandson, Knight Weber? No. Colin felt that with Seabass's temperament, it was impossible for him to hate Vera just because of these two trivial matters. There must be a deeper reason. Unless his core interests were affected, Seabass would definitely not take the risk of completely falling out with the future Dukes of the North and express his opposition in the Senate. When Senator Crete saw that Colin was deep in thought, he did not say anything else and immediately left. Colin Seabass. Why did he do this? Vera asked with a puzzled expression. I don't know either. Colin shook his head. But I know that this person has already chosen to stand against us. As long as he is in the Senate, the northern frontier will always be constrained. He helped Vera into the carriage. As soon as they sat down, he asked in a deep voice, Is there really no way to replace the senator? There is no such thing. As long as Seabass does not die and does not violate the Empire's laws, then we can't do anything to him. When she saw Colin frowning, Vera said, The idea that you proposed last time to use the northern frontier's feudal lords to influence the senators, so that Seabass can become a mere figurehead is not bad. Maybe we can use this method to make Seabass a senator, in name only. Colin shook his head and said, That is just a temporary measure. We can't always keep an eye on the Senate and threaten the senators of the northern frontier before every vote. What I want is a way to completely eliminate Seabass's influence once and for all. Vera fell into silence. She did not have any good suggestions for the time being. Colin's eyes flashed with a fierce light. To be honest, he really wanted to send out the blood slaves to kill Seabass. But after thinking about it, he still could not make up his mind. This kind of violent method was too dangerous. Moreover, a senator had just died, and the situation in the Empire was at its most tense. If the assassination failed, or if Colin's biggest secret was exposed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even a paladin like Prince Rhy couldn't bear the crime of killing a consul. Looking at the scenery outside the carriage, Colin suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He immediately ordered the coachman. Change the route to the Prime Minister's residence. Chapter 310. Colin, are you sure you don't need me to accompany you? The carriage stopped in front of the Prime Minister's mansion. After Colin got out of the carriage, he stopped Vera, who wanted to follow him. No, you can go back to the Phoenix Palace first. I will talk to the Prime Minister myself. Okay. Although she was full of doubts, Vera was already used to listening to Colin's orders. She tiptoed and kissed her husband gently on his lips before she waved goodbye to him. After informing the Prime Minister of his identity, a servant led Colin into the living room. Colin waited for about 5 minutes before he saw the Prime Minister of the Empire, Baron Heidegger, walking in. Good day, Viscount Angley. Baron Heidegger was a little surprised to see Colin alone. After all, Colin and Vera had been appearing in public together for the past few days. Good day, Prime Minister. I hope I am not disturbing you by coming here. Of course not. Baron Heidegger waved his hand and motioned for Colin to take a seat. He then rang the bell and several maids came in with a silver tray. They then placed red wine and small cakes in front of the two of them. Colin knew that when Scholar Dwayne visited the Empire last time, Heidegger had treated him with roasted sweet potatoes. In comparison, Heidegger's treatment this time was more formal. However, Colin also understood that Scholar Dwayne was actually the way to treat a true friend. Prime Minister, I have heard that you have a deep understanding of how to govern a country. Therefore, I have been looking for an opportunity to talk to you and learn from your experience. Sir Viscounts, you are too polite. Heidegger smiled and did not say much as he waited for Colin to continue. Colin took a sip of red wine and said in a relaxed tone, It's like this, Prime Minister. I've never really understood the existence of the Senate. Of course, I understand that the establishment of the Senate is to limit the imperial power, so that His Majesty will not make the wrong decision. However, what I want to know is, if the Senate makes the wrong decision, who can limit it? Baron Heidegger narrowed his eyes and smiled faintly. Your Excellency Viscounts, your doubts are indeed reasonable. However, the Council of Elders is not a monolithic block. There are 117 members. It is actually quite impossible for most of them to make mistakes. However, the 100 elders will be greatly influenced by the 5 consuls. Therefore, as long as most of the 5 consuls make mistakes, the Council of Elders will likely lead the Imperium into danger. Heidegger's interest was piqued. He smiled and asked, "So you think that the consul's influence is too great, right?" "That's right. Then do you have any good solutions?" "I did have an immature idea. Please go ahead." Colin swirled the wine glass in his hand, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He said leisurely, "I think the reason why the consul's influence is so great is because the position is lifelong. Therefore, if we abolish the life tenure of the consul and change it to, for example, a 3-year election, the above problem will not occur." A trace of disappointment flashed in Baron Heidegger's eyes. Clearly, Colin's suggestion did not pique his interest. He shook his head and said, "Your Excellency Viscounts, your idea is good. However, you know that to abolish the life tenure of the consul, the glorious charter will need to be amended. And to amend the charter, His Majesty must agree, and an absolute majority of votes in the Council of Elders. Your suggestion may be of interest to His Majesty, but it will definitely not pass the Council of Elders." Colin shook his head and said unhurriedly, "Prime Minister, that may not be the case." "Oh, what do you mean? Do you know how I plan to choose the consul?" "How? Isn't it a new recommendation from the 5 paladin families? And then a vote through the Council of Elders?" Baron Heidegger was puzzled. However, as soon as he said this, he seemed to have realized something, and his expression suddenly became serious. Colin smiled and continued to explain. "If it's the way you're talking about, of course it won't pass the Council of Elders. However, what if we let every member of the Council of Elders have the same qualifications to run for the position of consul? How can the consul not be a member of the Paladin family? This will be even more impossible to pass the Council of Elders. Even His Majesty won't." Heidegger stopped halfway through his words. He stood up abruptly and paced back and forth in the living room. His expression became more and more excited. After a while, he stood still and laughed heartily. "Wonderful. What a wonderful idea." Heidegger finally realized the feasibility of Colin's idea. This was making use of the biggest loophole in the Council of Elders. The consul and the ordinary elders only had 1 vote each. Although the consul had great influence, they did not have any special privileges in terms of votes. In fact, the ones who truly decided whether a proposal would pass the Council of Elders were the 100 or so ordinary elders. Of course, since the consul came from the 5 paladin families and had the right to speak in meetings of the Council of Elders, their attitude could influence the ordinary elders to a large extent. However, when the interests of the consul and the ordinary elders clashed, would the elders still vote according to the consul's attitude? Obviously not. Colin's current proposal was making use of this point. The current consul would of course strongly oppose this reform, but what about the ordinary elders? If Colin's proposal was passed, then the position of consul in the Council of Elders would no longer be exclusive to the Paladin family elders. The ordinary elders would also have this opportunity. Faced with such a temptation, the ordinary elders would definitely vote in favor of it. This way, no matter how much the current consul opposed it, Colin's proposal would definitely pass the Council of Elders with an absolute majority of votes. As long as the consul was no longer a lifelong position, they would no longer have the transcendent political status that they had today. In order to keep their position, they would become weak and start to compromise. They could be roped in, divided, and threatened. In short, the status of the consul in the Council of Elders would drop by a lot. More importantly, Colin would have a way to get rid of that damned Seabass St. Hilda. Baron Heidegger looked deeply at Colin and praised, "Your Excellency Viscounts, your wisdom amazes me. I have to say that this idea is very feasible." Colin smiled reservedly and said lightly, "That's good." Baron Heidegger rolled his eyes and suddenly smiled. "However, I'm afraid that your proposal will affect the interests of some people." "Of course. Colin shrugged and didn't care too much. Every reform will affect the interests of some people, but as long as it is beneficial to the Empire, then there is a meaning in implementing it. When he heard Colin's words, Baron Heidegger smiled and exposed him. Is that so? Are you proposing this for the benefit of the Empire? Why did I hear that during the meeting of the Council of Elders just now, some people clearly expressed their opposition to Vera inheriting the position of the Dukes of the North? Colin didn't think that he could hide his thoughts from the Prime Minister of the Empire. He didn't feel embarrassed when he heard Baron Heidegger's words. I am indeed thinking for the future of the Empire. Prime Minister, don't you want to see a weakened Council of Elders? Baron Heidegger's eyes flashed and he nodded. That's right. The Council of Elders needs to be reformed. However, he immediately showed a sly smile and suddenly asked, Viscount Angley, can you tell me why you let Miss Vera return to the Phoenix Palace alone when we were at the door? This time, Colin's expression finally changed. Chapter 311. Why did Colin ask Vera to return to the Phoenix Palace first? It was because he had a guilty conscience. The reform proposal that he had just proposed would indeed greatly weaken the influence of the senators. However, at the same time, it would also greatly damage the interests of the 5 major Paladin families. Just think about it. If any of the elders of the Paladin family failed to be elected as a senator after the reform was implemented, how embarrassing would that be? This would cause great damage to the prestige of the Paladin family, and the interests of the Paladin family would also not be guaranteed. Therefore, Colin was worried that this proposal would cause Vera to oppose it. After all, Vera was about to become the Dukes of the North, and it was inevitable that she would consider the issues from the perspective of the House of St. Hilda. Of course, Colin was confident that he could convince Vera. This was because as far as the current situation was concerned, Seabass was an obstacle to the House of St. Hilda, or more accurately, to Vera and Colin. However, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. Furthermore, Colin didn't want to offend the other Holy Knight families because of this. Prime Minister, this proposal is a gift from me to you. My only request is that you do not mention my name when you bring it to the Imperial Conference. Oh, are you sure? Baron Heidegger's expression became even more interesting. I am already 90% confident that this proposal will be passed. This is a great opportunity to change the political situation of the Empire, and even change the history of the Empire. Viscount Angley, are you really willing to give such an opportunity to become famous to me? Colin said indifferently, It's just a title. I don't care about it. As long as the political situation of the Empire can be improved, then I will be satisfied. Baron Heidegger smiled thoughtfully as if he had seen through Colin's thoughts. However, he did not care. This reform proposal was an excellent opportunity for him to weaken the influence of the Senate. Even without mentioning the personal grudge between him and the Senate, from the political standpoint of the Prime Minister of the Imperium, Baron Heidegger also hoped that the Senate would be less restrained. As for offending the Holy Knight family, Baron Heidegger didn't care at all. His power and status came from the Emperor, so it didn't matter what the 4 dukes thought of him. Besides, Baron Heidegger was certain that His Majesty would definitely support this reform proposal. After all, the Senate was set up to limit the imperial power, and the Emperor would probably want to abolish it completely. Your Excellency Viscounts, I admire your noble character and unquestionable integrity. Since that's the case, I won't hold back. I will send this proposal to the Imperial Conference for discussion as soon as possible. I am sure His Majesty will be very interested in it. However, I also feel a little uneasy about taking your wisdom for myself. If you have any needs, you can take this opportunity to ask, and I will do my best to help. Colin's eyes lit up, and he immediately said, Prime Minister, you must know that the northern frontier has just experienced 2 upheavals. The people are dying and famine is raging. If the central government of the Empire can provide some food, then I will be very grateful. Hearing this, Baron Heidegger frowned. After thinking for a moment, he shook his head and sighed. Your Excellency Viscounts, I am afraid this request will be a little difficult to fulfill. It's not that I don't want to help you. There is indeed some food in the imperial treasury, but His Majesty already has a use for this batch of food, so... Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he asked, "Are you going to give it to the Western region?" "Yes." Baron Heidegger nodded. Seeing that Colin was not worried, he explained, "Your Excellency Viscounts, with all due respect, the Western region needs this batch of food more. The expeditionary army that crossed the Broken Sky Mountains is still fighting with the orcs. Without this batch of food support, I am afraid that there will be a big problem. Although the northern frontier also has a food crisis, after all, the rebellion has been quelled. And I also know that you seem to be prepared. Although the food of the half-elf kingdom can't fully meet the needs of the northern frontier, it can also temporarily solve the urgent needs." Colin was silent. He knew that the reason why the Emperor chose to support the western region instead of the northern frontier might be because the western region was at war with the orcs, but more importantly, it was because of the paladin, Duke Sangarian. His existence made the western region more valuable to win over. Perhaps in the eyes of the Emperor, supporting Vera to the position of Duke, and then giving Prince Harrison to Colin as a student was already the greatest degree of winning over. "Well, I can understand your difficulties." Colin smiled. "But you also know that it takes a lot of money to buy food from the half-elves. The House of St. Hilda is now in an extremely difficult financial situation. So, can the central government of the Empire exempt some of the taxes of the northern frontier?" Baron Heidegger said hesitantly. "I can help you mention it at the Imperial Conference, but whether it will succeed or how much reduction we can get will depend on His Majesty." "Thank you for your trouble." Colin could not insist anymore, so he could only express his gratitude. Baron Heidegger thought for a moment and suddenly suggested, "Your Excellency Viscounts, if you want to get more tax reduction, I have a way." "Please say." Baron Heidegger lowered his voice and said, "You can go to the eastern region." Colin's heart moved, and he immediately understood what Baron Heidegger meant. In fact, this was the real reason why Emperor Reinhardt wanted to win over the northern frontier. The eastern region had completely turned to the church, and had long become a thorn in Emperor Reinhardt's side. If Colin could lead the army to cross the New Shui River, and even capture the White Dew City, then the Emperor would not hesitate to agree to any amount of support that the northern frontier needed. But unfortunately, Colin did not want to become the sword in the Emperor's hand. What's more, with the current situation of the northern frontier, it was impossible for them to withstand another war. If they forced a war with the eastern region, then the northern frontier would really have a tragedy of starving people everywhere. "I'll think about it," Colin said with an indifferent expression. Baron Heidegger seemed to have seen through Colin's perfunctory intention, so he smiled and said, "In fact, you don't really need to start a war. As long as you act like you are going to enter the eastern region, then I can speak up for the northern frontier in the Imperial Council." Colin rubbed his chin, and the name of a city suddenly appeared in his mind, Alfalfa City. Perhaps he could suddenly send troops to occupy Alfalfa City when the eastern region was unprepared. Alfalfa City did not have any city guards, so he could take it by surprise without dispatching an army. But at the same time, the geographical location of the city was destined to be extremely sensitive, and it could easily lead to a confrontation between the two regions. Colin could also use this to show his loyalty to the royal family and get funding at the same time. "Okay, I will think about it." Colin said the same thing, but his expression was a lot more cautious. Baron Heidegger also saw that Colin was not being perfunctory this time, so he smiled and did not say anything more. Then the two chatted for a while, and Colin got up and said goodbye. Baron Heidegger sent Colin to the door, and suddenly said with a smile, "Your Excellency Viscounts, you have really helped me a lot this time. As a personal thank you, I also want to give you a gift." Colin's expression changed and he said with a smile, "May I know what the gift is?" Baron Heidegger said mysteriously, "When you return to the northern frontier, if you have time, you might as well take a detour and go to Winterspring Town. Maybe you will have an unexpected harvest." Colin frowned, but seeing that the Prime Minister did not intend to elaborate, he did not ask any more questions. After casually agreeing, he left. Chapter 312. The colorful glaze was shining brightly under the illumination of the holy light, and the statues of the 7 first-generation paladins were standing on both sides of the hall, looking at the people in the hall. The 4 walls of the hall were decorated with murals full of religious meanings, and the seats on both sides were filled with the nobles who had come to watch the ceremony. The melodious hymns echoed in the hall, and a solemn atmosphere enveloped the entire hall. In the middle of the hall, Vera was wearing a simple white lace dress, and only her bare feet were exposed. A pure white iris wreath was on her head, and her long blonde hair was hanging down from her shoulders. The holy light projected from the dome of the church covered her beautiful face with a layer of dreamy color. Dong dong dong. Vera walked slowly towards the holy pool in front of her, following the rhythm of the bell. The hymns were still echoing in the hall. Today, I have made up my mind. Everything I have belongs to the Lord. This promise is made, and I will never go back on it. Only the Lord deserves all the reverence. The blood of atonement, wash away my sins. The water of life, give me a new life. Pope Gregory was standing beside the holy pool with a kind smile on his face as he watched Vera approaching step by step. When Vera stepped into the pool, the Pope opened his mouth, and his grand and majestic voice echoed in the hall. Lost lamb, suffering sinner, Vera St. Hilda, are you willing to abandon your prejudices and illusions of the past and serve the God of light with all your heart and soul? You will never regret it, and you will not rest until you die? Vera raised her head and looked into the Pope's eyes, which seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, and said firmly, I am willing. The Pope nodded and motioned for Vera to continue moving forward. At the same time he said, immerse yourself in this pool, and you will be separated from the filth. Immerse yourself in this pool, and your sins will be washed away. Immerse yourself in this pool, and you will be clean again. When Vera's whole body was immersed in the holy water, the Pope stretched out his right hand and placed it on the surface of the pool. May the glory of the Lord shine on your future path. Buzz. The holy light that descended from the sky suddenly became incomparably dazzling, and an incomparably grand aura enveloped everyone within. Colin could even feel a gaze that was looking down on him from above. It was like a brilliant heavenly might, and mortals didn't dare to look directly at it. Under this gaze, everyone in the church was like ants, trembling in fear and trepidation. After an unknown period of time, the gaze finally faded away, and the holy light that filled the entire church hall gradually dissipated. Colin could not hide the shock in his heart. He asked Baron Heidegger, who was beside him, could it be that the baptism ceremony presided over by His Holiness would attract the attention of the God of Light? No. Baron Heidegger sneered. Only when the Pope needs it. And, are you sure that's the gaze of the God of Light? Colin was slightly taken aback, and he asked doubtfully, if it's not the gaze of a god, then what is it? Baron Heidegger suddenly closed his mouth, and did not say anything. Colin had no choice but to turn his gaze back to the center of the hall. At this time, Vera had already stood up straight from the holy water, and her drenched clothes outlined her exquisite curves. Fortunately, there was a circle of dense fog around the holy water, blocking the rude gazes of the surrounding people. A female priest quickly stepped forward and put a white robe on Vera's body. Vera then walked out of the holy water and thanked Pope Gregory. Pope Gregory smiled and said, Miss Vera, you are the one who has been looked at by the Lord. You will be blessed in the future. Vera seemed to be a little confused, and she quickly said, Praise the Lord. I am not worthy of such an honor. No, the Lord will not misjudge a person, Pope Gregory said with deep meaning. Miss Vera, you will definitely find your own mission. You will repay the Lord's grace. After saying this sentence, Pope Gregory turned around and left. The baptism ceremony came to an end. Colin stepped forward and helped Vera to tidy up her wet hair before he asked, Are you cold? Vera shook her head and asked in a puzzled tone, Colin, I think I heard someone say something in my ear just now. Oh, what did he say? Colin was slightly surprised and he quickly asked, I can't remember. Vera's pretty face was full of confusion, and the water droplets rolling down her hair from time to time made her look like a lotus flower. Then you don't have to think too much about it. Colin smiled and was about to leave with Vera when he saw Emperor Reinhardt and Empress Medela slowly walking towards them. "Your Majesty, Your Highness." The two of them quickly greeted. Emperor Reinhardt waved his hand, indicating that the two of them did not need to be so polite. He then smiled at Vera and said, "How was it? Did you feel the power of the Lord?" "Yes, I felt it." A complicated expression appeared on Emperor Reinhardt's face, but he quickly put on a kind smile and nodded. "Well, rest well today. Tomorrow morning at the Phoenix Palace, I will confer you the title of Dukes of the North." "Yes, Your Majesty." Empress Medela stepped forward and held Vera's hand. "Let me take you to change into a clean set of clothes." "Thank you, Aunt." After the two of them walked away, Emperor Reinhardt suddenly said to Colin, "I heard from Baron Heidegger that you want to get food support and tax relief." "Yes, Your Majesty. The situation at the northern frontier is very difficult. If the central government of the empire can provide some help, then the House of St. Hilda will be very grateful." Emperor Reinhardt shook his head and said, "The empire's finances are not very good, so I can't promise you anything. However, I have a suggestion." "Please say it." "The eastern region has always been rich, and it hasn't suffered any war for so many years. Even I am jealous of the food piled up in the warehouse. So you can consider buying some food from the eastern region, or you can buy some food on credit." Colin blinked and smiled bitterly. "Your Majesty, I am afraid that the eastern region may not be willing." Emperor Reinhardt patted Colin's shoulder with a smile and said, "That will depend on your ability." Colin looked at Emperor Reinhardt's cold eyes and felt helpless. He knew that Emperor Reinhardt was still urging him to go to the eastern region. As for whether the northern frontier could still afford the war with the eastern region, perhaps Emperor Reinhardt didn't care at all. "Yes, Your Majesty, I will try my best to persuade the eastern region." Emperor Reinhardt smiled indifferently as if he understood the meaning of Colin's words. He suddenly said, "By the way, remember to bring Harrison with you. Let him learn from you." Colin wanted to say that Emperor Reinhardt was not afraid that his son would have an accident on the battlefield. Of course, Colin was not stupid enough to say such words. At this time, Vera had also changed her clothes and walked over with Empress Medela, talking and laughing. Colin took Vera's hand, and the two of them said goodbye to the Emperor and Empress. After they left, Emperor Reinhardt asked in a low voice, "How was it?" Empress Medela nodded with a dignified expression. Emperor Reinhardt's face suddenly became a little ferocious, and he gritted his teeth and shouted, "Damn Gregory! He is blasphemous!" Empress Medela was silent. Emperor Reinhardt seemed to have made up his mind. "It is not too late to cancel tomorrow's coronation ceremony." "You are crazy. The Senate has already recognized Vera's right of inheritance." "So what? I already have a way to deal with the Senate." "That is not good. This will seriously damage your prestige and make the other Paladin families bitterly disappointed." Emperor Reinhardt's tone was full of anxiety as he said angrily, "What do you think we should do?" Empress Medela thought for a moment and said, "Colin Angelo, we can control the northern frontier through him." Emperor Reinhardt smiled disdainfully. "Do you think that by making Harrison and Judy worship him as their teacher, he will be loyal to us?" "No, I have a way." "What way?" Empress Medela did not answer Emperor Reinhardt's question. Instead, she said indifferently, "If you still trust me, then don't ask too much." Emperor Reinhardt narrowed his eyes and his face became gloomy. He seemed to be in a dilemma. After a long while, he finally smiled and said, "Of course I trust you, my Empress. Then wait for my good news." After saying that, Empress Medela's willowy waist swayed slightly as she gracefully walked out. Chapter 313. Night fell. Vera, who had just finished bathing, changed into a silk nightgown. Her snow-white feet were gently tapping on the pinewood floor. Her slender body was leaning in front of the dressing table, and she was facing a bronze mirror with her hair tied up in a bun. A beautiful face was reflected in the mirror. It was hazy and she looked like a rose that had just been moistened by the rain. There was a faint fragrance in the room. It was fresh and lingering. Colin was half lying on the sofa, quietly admiring the expression of Vera's little wife. Suddenly he smiled and asked, "What is the matter with the golden mark on your chest?" Vera tilted her head and she was also puzzled. "I don't know. It seems like it just appeared today. Maybe it has something to do with the baptism ceremony." Colin gradually stopped smiling and frowned. "Baptism? Yes, but I don't feel anything wrong with my body." Vera did not seem to care. Seeing that Colin was worried about her, Vera tiptoed and walked over to him. She threw herself lightly on the sofa and snuggled into her lover's arms. "Then let me take a closer look." Colin hugged Vera's slender waist and reached out to take off her nightgown. Vera giggled, but she did not stop him. But at this moment, someone knocked on the door. Colin stopped what he was doing and asked in a bad mood, "What is it?" The maid's voice came from outside the door. "Viscounts, Her Royal Highness the Queen has asked you to give a lecture to Prince Harrison and Princess Judy." Colin was speechless. What kind of lecture was he going to give at this time? Vera kissed Colin gently on his cheek and said with a smile, "Hurry up and go. Don't let Aunt wait for too long." Colin was helpless and he had no choice but to get up and say, "Well, if I come back late, you can go to bed first." Vera nodded and began to help Colin change his clothes. After getting ready, Colin went out and followed the maid all the way to the main hall. The further they went, the tighter the security Colin found. About a quarter of an hour later, the maid finally stopped. She reached out and gently pushed open the magnificent golden wooden door. The maid bowed to Colin. Colin nodded and walked in. There was a dark red round table, a snow-white cashmere carpet, and an exquisite crystal chandelier. However, there was no one there. "Your Highness? Viscount Angeli, please come in." Colin tried to shout, and then he heard a gentle voice, "Viscount Angeli, please." Colin took a few steps forward. After turning a corner, he found the door that led to the inner room. Lifting the veil hanging on the door, Colin walked into the room. Pink curtains, a luxurious ivory bed, and an exquisite dressing table. Colin immediately realized that this should be the Empress' bedroom. The gentle night breeze blew in, and the curtain on the balcony moved with the wind, revealing a slender figure. Colin hurriedly bowed and greeted, "Your Highness the Empress." Empress Medela turned around and smiled sweetly at Colin. "I hope you don't mind that I called you here so late." "Of course not. May I know where Prince Harrison and Princess Judy are now? And how do you want me to start teaching them?" "There's no hurry. I have more important things to discuss with you. Please speak." Colin suddenly had an ominous feeling, but since he had already been tricked, he couldn't just turn around and run away. "Don't be nervous, sit." Colin looked around and found that he could only sit on the bed and in front of the dressing table. But he obviously wouldn't sit in either of these places, so he could only stand awkwardly and pretend not to hear. Fortunately, Empress Medela didn't have any intention of making things difficult for Colin. Seeing this, she didn't force him. She asked, "What do you think of the baptism this morning?" Colin's heart skipped a beat. He immediately thought of the gaze that seemed to fall from the sky, and the hesitant look of the Imperial Prime Minister, Baron Heidegger. "I think it's very good." Colin played dumb. "It's a great honor to have His Holiness the Pope personally baptize Vera." Empress Medela looked at Colin with a faint smile, as if she wanted to see his true thoughts. But Colin lowered his head, unmoved by the Empress's scrutinizing gaze. "Say," Empress Medela sighed, and there was a trace of bitterness in her voice. "It seems that you still don't trust me." "Of course I trust your Highness," Colin immediately replied, but there wasn't much sincerity in his words. The room fell silent, and only the soft sound of the night wind blowing the curtain could be heard. After waiting for a long time, Colin couldn't help but raise his head, and then he met the Empress's calm gaze. The night wind blew the light dress tightly against her body, outlining her wonderful curves. Colin immediately withdrew his gaze and returned to his original state of looking down. Empress Medela finally spoke again, but this time her voice was a little dignified. "Colin, perhaps you still don't realize the seriousness of the matter. Your Highness, please forgive my ignorance." Colin still looked the same. as if he was determined to keep a distance from the beautiful Empress. Empress Medella's face was expressionless. She left the balcony and walked slowly towards Colin. She said, "I remember the first time we met in Winter City. At that time, we were attending Vera's coming-of-age ceremony." "Yes, Your Highness." Colin was more and more confused about what the Empress wanted to do. "I remember that the coming-of-age ceremony was really wonderful. The Troll Prince, the Half-Elf Prince, and you, all three of you proposed to Vera at the same time. In the end, my brother chose the Half-Elf Prince, and the two of you almost fought because of it." Listening to Empress Medella reminiscing about the past, Colin was still silent, but he kept guessing the Empress's true purpose. Oh, by the way, something big happened at that time. Empress Medella had already walked in front of Colin. Her breath was like orchids. Marquis Adams was poisoned to death. Colin lowered his head and looked at the Empress's pink toenails shining like crystals. He couldn't help but squint slightly. Empress Medella lifted Colin's chin from behind and forced him to look at her. She smiled and asked, "Do you know who poisoned him?" Colin's heart finally began to stir. Thoughts kept appearing in his mind, but he couldn't figure out the most important one. This puzzle had troubled him for a long time. At that time, his first suspect was actually Marquis Garcia, because at that time, the Duke of St. Hilda had just betrayed his brother and did not keep his promise to let Vera inherit the title of Marquis of the Eastern region. Instead, he chose his second son, Adams. Colin's first reaction, and perhaps the first reaction of most people at that time, was that Adams's death was Marquis Garcia's revenge on his brother. But later, Colin felt that with Marquis Garcia's character, he shouldn't be able to do such a sinister thing. When he was in Silvermoon City, when he guessed that the Duke of St. Hilda had a series of plans against the half-elves, Colin felt that the Duke of St. Hilda might have played a trick and poisoned his second son. But later, when Colin learned that the Duke of St. Hilda was a paladin, he immediately overturned his guess. After all, the Duke of St. Hilda, who had the strength of a paladin, would not use such means to achieve his own goals. Originally, Colin had already given up, thinking that the death of Marquis Adams would be an unsolved case forever, but now, Queen Medella brought it up again. This made Colin couldn't help but have a thought in his mind. Queen Medella looked at Colin, whose expression changed, and finally showed a satisfied smile, but she seemed to be not satisfied with this, and said again, "Also the will left by the Duke of St. Hilda. Guess, why did he set Vera as the first heir?" Colin opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. The smile on Queen Medella's face became more and more brilliant, and she once again threw out a heavy bomb. "Do you know, His Majesty wanted to deny Vera's inheritance twice, but I stopped him. Do you know why?" Colin looked at the charming face in front of him, and his heart thumped so hard that it almost jumped out of his chest. Thousands of thoughts finally converged into an answer in his mind, but this answer made Colin want to run away. Queen Medella admired Colin, who was in a dilemma, and said with a smile, "Colin, do you know that the person in the world who wants to see Vera become the Dukes of the North the most, besides you, is me?" At this time Colin calmed down. He knew that Queen Medella had shown her cards. This could only mean that the situation was indeed very serious, as she said. She no longer allowed Colin to be separated from her. On the surface, she said that she trusted him, but turned around and began to suspect him. "Your Highness, I understand." Colin no longer avoided Queen Medella's gaze, and said in a deep voice, "What do you understand?" Queen Medella's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. "I understand why I should trust you." "Why?" Colin gently pushed Queen Medella's hand away, took half a step back, and said respectfully, "Because you are Vera's biological mother." Chapter 314. From the first time he met Vera, Colin began to guess her identity. He also thought about the secrets that she might have hidden under her identity. She was the Duke's adopted daughter, but she was sent to Yevil to study the arcane arts. At that time, Colin was thinking about the reason why the Duke of St. Hilda did this. It was not until Marquis Garcia revealed a corner of this secret that Colin finally understood why the Duke of St. Hilda treated Vera. But at the same time, he could not help but wonder who Vera's biological mother was. Why didn't Marquis Garcia marry her? Why did he keep her identity a secret? Now he finally understood. That was fucking incest. No wonder Marquis Garcia could not marry her, and no wonder the Duke of St. Hilda helped to adopt Vera as his daughter. Moreover, when he thought about Empress Medella's age and Vera's age, Colin could not help but curse Marquis Garcia. Beast. If this was in modern society, he would definitely end up in the same situation. He also finally understood who poisoned Marquis Adams to death. In the beginning, the Duke of St. Hilda and Marquis Garcia had a secret promise that Empress Medella must have known. Therefore, when the Duke of St. Hilda broke his promise, Vera's biological mother decisively carried out her revenge. However, Colin could not help but have a little doubt. It was reasonable to say that the Duke of St. Hilda should have known something about Marquis Garcia and Empress Medella. Once the news of the incest between the two of them was leaked, they would be completely finished. Especially Medella. Her position as the Empress would definitely be lost, and the angry Emperor might even kill her because of this. Why did Empress Medella still dare to be so arrogant? Not only did she poison Marquis Adams to death, but she also forced the Duke of St. Hilda to write his will, and made Vera the first heir of the Dukes of the North. Unless the Duke of St. Hilda had something even more important in Queen Medella's hands. Just as Colin was imagining the grudges between the three siblings, Queen Medella spoke again. Colin, you are indeed smart. However, I hope that you can use your intelligence in the right place. Yes, Your Highness. Colin's attitude was obviously much more sincere. Although Colin still had a lot of doubts about this mysterious queen, at least he was certain that she would not harm Vera. In this regard, the two of them were indeed natural allies. Do you know why I chose this moment to be honest with you? Queen Medella took a few steps back and lay on her side on the ivory bed, revealing her alluring curves. It should be because of the baptism ceremony during the day. Colin no longer avoided the question and said seriously, I am also guessing that Pope Gregory might have done something to Vera. Yes. The vision that appeared in the last stage of the baptism ceremony was not the normal process, but the Pope's magic. What magic? I don't know. Colin couldn't help but look up, only to see Queen Medella's helpless face. She was not deliberately not saying anything. The church has many secrets. Even the royal family can't completely figure it out. Queen Medella continued. There were actually two divine spells that Gregory used during the baptism ceremony. One was the gaze that you felt from him. Did you think that it was the gaze of the god of light? Seeing Colin nodding, Queen Medella smiled disdainfully. How could the god of light cast his gaze on such a trivial matter? How could Pope Gregory summon the god of light? This magic is actually just a cover. The purpose is to attract everyone's attention and conceal the second magic that he really wants to use. Colin hurriedly asked. There's another divine spell. Yes. I don't know the name of this magic, but I know its effect. What effect? Colin asked a little nervously. It will make the subject gradually become closer to the holy light, and eventually become a fanatic of the church. Colin's heart tightened and he suppressed his worry for Vera. First he asked doubtfully, Your Highness, if you don't know the name of this magic, how do you know its effect? Because Vera is not the first person to be affected. Who else has been affected by this magic before? Queen Medella did not answer immediately, but asked, Do you know why the church and the royal family have been fighting since the founding of the kingdom until now? Colin wanted to say that it was just a fight for power and profit. Did it need more than that? But in the end he said sincerely, Please help me. Because when the first pope baptized Garin, the son of the founding emperor, His Majesty Ghana, he used a similar method. Empress Medella smiled coldly and continued. At that time, His Majesty Ghana did not care. And he also thought that his son's baptism attracted the attention of the god of light. But later, as time passed, Garin became closer to the church, and even wanted to become an ascetic, and even join the Knights Templar. At that time, His Majesty Ghana realized that something was wrong. After that, he personally went to the peak of the Holy Mountain to question the Pope, and even fought him. In the end, the Pope finally admitted to his little tricks under the threat of this legendary holy knight, and personally removed the divine mark on Garen's body. After that, Garen gradually returned to normal, and after he was crowned as the second emperor of the kingdom, he even more severely restricted the power of the church, which completely led to a 1,000-year battle between the church and the royal family. So this magic, besides making the subject closer to the church, does it have any other side effects? Yes. However, it is not a side effect because it can actually strengthen the subject's sensitivity and affinity to the holy light. You know about the Knights Templar, right? Most of the knights in the Knights Templar are civilians, because few of the nobles are willing to dedicate themselves to the church and become a tool for others to use. Therefore, the church chooses some of the civilians with good qualifications to baptize them. However, because of the inferior bloodline of the civilians, their affinity to the holy light is extremely poor, and even if they manage to become knights, their achievements are very limited. Therefore, this magic is needed to help strengthen their sensitivity to the holy light and help them advance. At the same time, this is also a means of brainwashing. And this is the reason why the Knights Templar are so devout to the point of madness. Of course, the knights born from this magic will not be able to advance to the holy domain. Otherwise, I believe that many nobles will not hesitate to join the Knights Templar for the glory of the paladin. It is good that there are no other side effects. Colin was slightly relieved, and he let out a long sigh and said, "So if I want to remove the magic on Vera's body, I will have to look for Pope Gregory?" "Yes." Empress Medela nodded. "However, I advise you not to act rashly. Pope Gregory is not a simple person, and he is not as kind as he appears to be." "I understand. In addition, I advise you not to tell Vera about this. This kind of magic has an influence on one's mind, and it is not something that can be resisted by one's own will. If she learns about it, it will only increase her anxiety and guilt, and it may even be counterproductive. Then what should I do?" Empress Medela looked at Colin seriously, and she stretched out one finger. "First of all, you must personally control the military and political power of the northern frontier. I believe that with your ability and Vera's trust in you, this should not be difficult." She then stretched out a second finger. "Secondly, you must pay careful attention to Vera's mental state, and it is best not to let her come into too much contact with the members of the church. If you can make her stay at home and concentrate on studying arcane magic, that would be the best. Of course, you must be careful when you study arcane magic, and do not let the people of the church see you. After all, after converting to the God of Light, Vera should not be able to come into contact with the heresy of arcane magic anymore." When she saw Colin nodding, Empress Medela finally said, "When the time is right, we can follow King Ghana's example and ask His Holiness the Pope to personally remove the magic from Vera." When the time was right, of course, it was when the royal family could completely suppress the church. "Okay." Colin nodded solemnly. "I will do as you say." Empress Medela nodded with satisfaction, and she smiled again, and the light in the room suddenly seemed to brighten a lot. "Colin, I have always admired you, and I think that you are the key to our fight against the church. I hope that you will not let me down." "I will do my best," Colin said in a deep voice, and then he said, "Your Highness, if you do not have any other instructions, then I will take my leave first." "Wait." Empress Medela immediately stopped Colin. "You have forgotten the most important thing." "What is it? Please tell me." "An alliance." Colin was stunned for a moment, and then he asked doubtfully, "Do you want an alliance ceremony?" "Ceremonies are all empty. The key is, what is the basis of our trust?" Colin seemed to understand what Empress Medela meant, and he asked tentatively, "Then do you want me to swear an oath to you?" "I do not believe in oaths." Colin was a little embarrassed, and he asked again, "Then let's write a written agreement." Empress Medela shook her head again. "That is just a piece of scrap paper." Colin was at his wit's end and could only say, "Then do you have any good suggestions?" Empress Medela looked at Colin with deep eyes and said, "Do you trust me now?" "Of course." "Why?" "Because you are Vera's biological mother, and I am Vera's husband." Empress Medela nodded, and then she shook her head. "Yes, but my blood relationship with Vera cannot be changed. You, on the other hand, can divorce at any time." Colin narrowed his eyes and looked at Empress Medela quietly, as if he wanted to see what kind of soul was hidden behind this beautiful face. Empress Medela saw that Colin was not speaking, and she smiled faintly. "Let me tell you why you trust me. Because you have something on me." This was indeed true. After learning that Vera was Empress Medela's biological daughter, and even the real murderer of Marquis Adam's death, Colin did indeed have something on Empress Medela. Therefore, even without Vera's relationship, Colin could ensure that Empress Medela would not dare to do anything that would harm her interests. Otherwise, as long as Colin made this secret public, Empress Medela's fate would be extremely miserable. However, this was only a one-sided trust. Colin finally understood Empress Medela's meaning, and he blurted out, "You also want to have something on me?" "Yes," Empress Medela nodded. "This way this alliance will be truly unbreakable." When Colin heard this, he could not help but admire the Empress's strange logic. This was the first time he had seen such an alliance. But when he thought about it carefully, it did make some sense. If both sides had something on each other, it would indeed be more binding than an oath or covenant. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I'm afraid I don't have anything on me to give you," Colin said with an innocent face, as if he was really a 20-year-old who had never done anything bad. Empress Medela stretched out a crystal-clear jade foot and slowly climbed up Colin's thigh, and at the same time, said in an extremely ambiguous tone, "It doesn't matter, we can create something on you now." That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.